everyone. Welcome to another exciting commentary podcast. I am Captain Logan, and with me today is Steve Baxi.
Hey, everybody.
And the magnanimous Dan Torrey.
Hello.
These guys have been begging me for a long time to do this movie, and we're finally getting to it. We've been talking about it ever since last summer. Dan and Steve are both really big fans of this movie. I want to say we were all together on the panel when we did the spoiler podcast for this. Am I right about that?
Yeah, we were.
And so it's going to be really fun to actually get to watch it with these guys and pick it apart scene for scene and get in a really good discussion as we're watching it. We haven't done a commentary podcast in a long time, and this is a really cool one to jump into. I've been really itching to do this, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get into it as soon as possible because this is a longer movie. If you want to watch it along with us, if you've never listened to one of our commentary podcasts, the way it works is grab your DVD, your Blu-ray, or Amazon Prime, or Amazon, or however, I guess you have to rent it, however you're going to watch it, get it past all the menus, get it to timestamp 0, and you can watch it along with us. You'll just press play whenever I say now, listen to it like a commentary track. If you want to listen to it in your car, or while you're jogging, or while you're making an omelet, you can do that as well, and we'll just do our level best to provide a little bit of context for you as we're talking. You guys, any preamble you want to do, or should we just get straight into it?
I really like this movie. I think this is the best movie that Marvel's made so far. Definitely as a studio, if not all Marvel adaptations. Like, I think technically it's the best one. It's not like it's definitely a fun one to watch. It's not like the one that I have the most nostalgia for, I guess. Like, I love watching the first two Raimi Spider-Man movies because I have nostalgia for them, and Spider-Man's my favorite character. But this movie's amazing. I love almost everything about it.
Yeah, same with me. This is my all-time favorite comic book movie of all time. And Winter Soldier is what...
That's why you said all-time twice.
Exactly. I'm just so excited I can't speak. Winter Soldier is what got me into comics, modern comics.
Winter Soldier! I can't even...
Oh, yeah. We'll talk about some of the theater experiences I had. But no, Winter Soldier is the reason I'm into modern comics in the first place. And it's a big deal for me because it's the first thing me and my dad did together when I was old enough to kind of understand stuff like that. So, like, there's an immense nostalgic connection to it from the inception. So I was going to go into this loving it, and I love it even more now because it's so good.
That's really neat, Steve. I mean, I knew you were a fan of Brubaker, but I didn't know it was something that you and your dad did together. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's great. We'll get into some of the interesting stuff with Brubaker's run and his appearance in the movie, so...
Well, importantly, Steve has seen this movie more times than I've been on a trampoline, and I mean, he just watches it all the time.
I do.
And so, in fact, he's watched it so many times, I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't watch it while he was on a trampoline. So, I will be really surprised if Steve will be able to hold back from saying all the lines of dialogue as we go along. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and get started. Get your disc rigged up, everybody, and here we go. Everybody, please press play right now. So I posted some fighting words a couple weeks ago on Facebook. I said that I watched this again as I was working on my trivia book, and I said that I may be to a point where I like this movie better than The Dark Knight.
I do.
And I don't know, I still don't know how I feel about it, and it was fighting words, but boy, I don't know, I get giddy watching it now.
I can certainly understand that. The Dark Knight's not everybody's bag, but I feel like it's very hard not to at least enjoy this movie.
Yeah.
This movie has Batroc the Leaper in it, therefore it
right? So, cool tidbit, the Russos don't like using other people's work at all, especially when they're doing sequels. So this opening with the old Captain America music is the only thing they reuse in the whole movie. Even the flashback stuff we get later is stuff they reshot.
Oh, interesting.
So when you say reuse, you mean they didn't even want that theme in their soundtrack?
They didn't at all. That one little couple seconds of it is the only thing we get of any other Captain America material before them.
Well, I'm glad they did it because it helps to tie it together really well. I mean, like, I noticed it from the very beginning.
Yeah.
You know, first time I saw it.
Yeah. And it gets kind of problematic later because the Captain America costume they use is wrong, but we'll talk about that.
Falcon is Sam Jones here is one of the most immediately likable characters I've seen in a movie in a long time. From the very moment he starts talking, I'm like, I like this guy.
Yeah, his name is Sam Wilson too. Just
Oh, did I say Jones?
yeah.
I'm sorry, Sam Wilson. Yeah, Sam Jones was a Power Ranger.
But yeah, I really like the Falcon in this. I'm not a huge comic book Captain America fan, not because I dislike the character or anything. I just haven't read a ton of Captain America stuff. I've read some of Brubaker and I really liked that, but I've never really dove in headfirst and read a bunch of like the great stories with the character. So I didn't really have any expectations placed on Falcon when I saw him in the movie because I haven't read a ton of stuff with him in it, and I really
Same
liked
here.
him right away.
Yeah, he's quite a bit different as far as his background and stuff goes, but Anthony Mackie is playing him like he's off the page. He's got the exact same personality and energy to him. He's even got the same taste with the Trouble Man soundtrack. Because Marvin Gaye is something that Sam Wilson in the comics references from time to time. So that's
Oh,
Oh,
cool.
cool.
I'm not sure if that was on purpose, but it might have been.
I'm sure glad I brought somebody in here that's read Captain America in comics because neither Dan or I are big Captain America
Oh,
guys.
by the way, I love that Black Widow texts with a smiley face. I think that's hilarious.
Yeah.
When he pulls out the piece of paper with all the things that he is that he's trying to keep up with from important cultural things, that list is different in different countries.
Yes.
Oh, interesting.
It says Sherlock and Doctor Who in the British version, which is really cool.
Oh, that car
I just
is
think that's
so
a lot of
beautiful.
fun.
And I think there's some kind of samurai movie or something like that in the Asian version of it. But yeah, it's a pretty cool list.
Dan, Scarlett Johansson's not bad either.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's really good looking, and that car she's driving is just as beautiful as her. I love
Well, obviously,
Corvettes.
we'll obviously talk about this a lot as we get more into her scenes, but this movie, well, just in general, makes a lot of the rest of the Marvel movies retroactively better films, I think,
Yeah.
and especially Avengers. But suddenly, I love this character. I think she's layered. I think she's fascinating. I think she's playing it a little bit differently here than she did in Avengers, and I don't think that's inconsistent. I think that's part of the whole point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Black Widow in the movies got progressively cooler, I think, ever since her first appearance. Like in Iron Man 2, she didn't really do anything for me. She was just kind of there. And in Avengers, like there was hints at the layers that this movie explores. Obviously, with some of the stuff she talks about with her background with Loki and stuff like that. And we're not like fully exploring her background here, but we're looking at how damaged this character is psychologically at times, and um, the way she views the world, and that informs a lot of the actions she has in Avengers for sure, which is
That's
really
right.
cool.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at her psychology before we're looking at her history,
Right.
and you can be sure that we're gonna get more of that as we go along. It's really easy to jump to criticisms that you hear a lot, just like like you're a creative writing professor saying, "Oh, we don't have this character fleshed out enough because we don't know enough about their history." But does the character feel real and come alive, and does it make sense to tell us everything about her history as we're going? And I think an argument could be made that we're just not there yet.
Yeah, and she's
Yeah.
the perfect character to team up with Cap here because in this movie, it's all sort of about his worldview as informed by America's role in the world in the 40s and how, America like was high on the victory of winning World War II, and that was a war fought by people that were, at least we thought we were righteous and all that stuff. And Black Widow comes from the time where America's a covert empire and she worked for our enemy, and she sees the world very differently from the way Captain America did in the way that he fought. And that's kind of what the movie's all about. And having those two contrasting viewpoints teamed up with each other and changed by the end is really interesting.
And it's really great that they make her almost a second protagonist in this movie. She's got just as
Mm.
many scenes as Cap and just as many important moments. And we don't feel the need to ever shift the focus completely away from Steve, since it's all about how he's impacting her and how she's coming
Yeah,
to better understand herself along the ride with him.
exactly. And the fact that there's such they give as much time for both of them, and they do great character stuff with both of them. It almost makes you forget that Hawkeye's not in the movie. That's my biggest problem with it in general.
This
The
is
fact
where
that he's
is
not
he?
here.
He ought to be here, yeah.
And
But no, to Steve's point, they didn't have to call it Cap and Widow, Winter Soldier.
the thing about Hawkeye, we'll mention this, but somewhere later in the film, there is actually supposed to be a scene with him that they wanted to film and they couldn't because of Jeremy
Oh.
Renner's schedule. But there was supposed to be a very heated exchange there, and some talk about what Hawkeye's loyalties are compared to Cap and compared to Widow, because he's fundamentally different in some respects, and they wanted to bring that out.
I wish they did, because Hawkeye is one of my favorite characters in the Avengers from the
Yeah.
comics, and he just doesn't get a lot to do in Avengers because of what happens to him in the plot. And I hope he gets more to do in the future in Avengers 2. They're saying he will, but the amount of characters in that movie, I hope Joss Whedon pulls it off. But at this point, I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what to expect. You know?
Well, we'll find out in about a month.
Yeah.
Dan, to your point earlier about Captain America versus Black Widow and how they're each a product of their time, I think it's really interesting looking at this as a comic book adaptation because of that.
Mm.
Because you're seeing both eras of comics being brought to screen here, and of course you see that in comics all the time too. I mean, we're constantly doing a lot of commentary about what the world is like now versus what it was like when we were doing Golden and Silver Age, and we say a lot of things about the how innocent we looked at things in the 40s versus how we became kind of more progressively cynical. I think it's kind of neat to have both of those point of views embedded in a movie like this, because the world being so cynical that that people are willing to give away their freedoms in order for protection is what this movie is all about.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I think the key word in what you just mentioned, Cap, is progression and progressively, because a lot of what this movie talks about is technological determinism, and that after certain innovations or certain events, we create the infrastructure to support that lifestyle and can't imagine our lives without it. And Cap is just trying to prevent that all the way through with Project Insight. But importantly, he's not scot-free either. Like, Nick Fury does call him on it later that in World War II, there were some terrible things that they did. It's just there was a fundamentally different ideology in place. And technology and the kinds of means to which you wage war are what determine those ideologies going forward.
All that means is that he's human, and that no ideology is perfect.
Yeah.
What I mean is the fact that that Captain America and his team had to make compromises in World War II. There are always compromises that have to be made, and I think is kind of his point, that it doesn't mean that he because if you go too far in any direction, it gets preposterous.
Yeah.
I
Even
mean,
with Caps, when he's too trusting in some ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important for this movie to come out and not view World War II with rose-tinted glasses like a lot of people do. I mean, Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense in the United States at the time, went on record and said the things that America did in the war, if they lost, they would have been tried as war criminals, just like the Nazis were. Like they killed a lot of civilians. So, it's important to realize that they did what they felt they needed to do to win the war, and obviously the Nazis were a bigger evil.
And I mean, there's a lot of horror stories from the German side about what American troops would do to them once they were already captured and surrendered, even if they didn't fire on them.
Yeah, and there's the famous story too about how when the Nazis were retreating, they retreated to the west because they thought the Westerners, like the British and the Americans, would treat them better than the Russians, because the Russians just they lost so many people and they were so brutal.
Yeah. So Batrock's a really fun character in the comics, and he's really fun here. The fact that they got George St. Pierre to play him is really cool, because he's able to do the movements just right, and there's only about, I think, one or two quick shots that aren't him doing the stunts, and that's when he does the really cool backflip in this fight that we see, and I think that's really about it. Most of this is just him kicking around with Chris Evans.
That's
I also think it's a lot of fun. I was just gonna say, I also think it's a lot of fun that Captain America ultimately beats him by doing one of his moves against him.
Yeah, that's cool.
he kind of brings himself down to his level, and he's like, okay, I'll fight you on your terms. I'm still gonna win.
Yeah, it's great.
I was gonna say, one of the things that really struck me when I was watching this movie in the theater immediately was how well Cap's powers are utilized, and how he's leaping around and fighting with the shield, and the direction of the action is inspired. I
One
think
of their
the Russos did a phenomenal job directing the action in this movie.
one of their biggest points is that Captain America is a character that if you didn't know his origin, you can't tell he has superpowers. And
Mm.
so they have to cash in on the fact that they can't do shaky cam stuff and they can't do too much CGI because Cap's powers are all physical. So you really have to get the zooms right and get the movement right to make sure that the impacts of the blows convey the fact that he's more than human.
See, and that's the kind of director you need for a movie like this, someone that understands the character to that level.
Yeah, they wanted this movie to be honest trailers proof, and that was precisely their quote. They wanted to be honest trailers proof. And when you watch the
Wow.
honest trailer, they admit that it's a really good movie.
I also like how there's a lot of stuff visually in this movie. I mean, there's just so much care and attention to detail that visually there's a lot of stuff that is reflecting uh, what's going on character-wise and thematically. I didn't notice this until this viewing, but you guys notice just how muted the colors are on the shield?
Yeah.
Mm.
We've got Shield, and also interesting that he's working for Shield and he has a shield, and Shield is trying to use Captain America as their own instrument, and he's just a really good soldier with superpowers, and so he's trying to keep to his own ideals, but they have different ideas than he does, and you look at the costume they gave him, and I hate this costume, and I'm supposed to.
Yeah.
It's the muted gray, not looking at things in black and white Captain America suit for what if we took this character and attempted to make him a shield agent, and of course that doesn't work. You can't do that to Captain America. And so the reason he has to get that other costume at the end is not just because he needs a costume. He could have gone and put this one back on, but that's not Captain America. That doesn't that suit doesn't reflect those ideals.
Yeah, yeah. It's a really big point that Chris Evans looks quite a bit different now too. Like he's got a different haircut. His fighting style is completely different because he has to be trained like 21st century American infiltration troops, and so he's got a much more westernized sort of shoot to kill mentality in his fighting, and he doesn't like that. It doesn't look good on him in a lot of ways, like with the costume. So progressively when we get near into the end of the movie, he's doing more of like his more bombastic moves like he did in the first movie because he trusts kind of the old mentality going into war that more than he does with Fury and Shield and their kind of shadowy methods.
I love that Sam Jackson gets a lot to do as Nick Fury in this movie too,
Yeah.
because Sam Jackson is one of my favorite actors. I love Sam Jackson. The fact that they cast him as Nick Fury is really cool. Like that, because Samuel L. Jackson is a comic book fan and was really happy that they use his likeness in the Ultimate Comics, and just seems like a perfect fit to cast him in the movies. And I was going to be sort of disappointed if they didn't use him in any capacity other than bringing the Avengers together in these movies, because he's such a talent. I didn't want him to be wasted like he was in the Star Wars prequels.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. One of the really cool things about Sam Jackson's performance and the fact that they really cash in on the guy that you're casting an actor that's got a very distinct voice and a very distinct personality, and so he doesn't really act as much as he just brings his own character to every role he's in. But they cash in on the fact that this guy is not only a lot of fun and really likable, but it's kind of terrifying when you find yourself agreeing with him because Project Insight's completely his idea, and he's leading one of the most dangerous organizations in the world, and you love the guy.
And he has a brilliant argument in this scene for why it's necessary. When they're going down this elevator and he's telling the story about his grandfather and this kind of idea of escalation where you have to protect yourself, and if people keep, if the world keeps getting scarier, you've got to be scarier too, or you're going to be swept up in it and get killed. And then to have that little story and be all about that, and then to suddenly get this epic scale of this extremely terrifying base of all this weaponry and what they're about to do. I think that's really cool that he's just talking about a guy packing a gun in his lunchbox, and that turns into all of this.
Yeah, and Captain America, importantly, is from a time where carrying a gun in your lunchbox wasn't necessary.
Not only that, but I would argue that even if a lot of other people thought it was, he still never would, just because it goes against his worldview. I mean, I would like to think that if Captain America had not been stuck in the glacier, he wouldn't have been changed by the 50s or the 60s or the 70s. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I don't know that he would have. I mean, I think he's like Batman in that way, that he's unchangeable. He's unyielding. Sure, he compromises in some ways when he thinks, yeah, like we said earlier with the World War II thing, but by and large, he's a character that you tell stories about how you give him opportunities for change and he never takes them because he believes so much in his own worldview. And then there are sometimes consequences to that. Of course, his worldview is more altruistic than Batman's.
To your point, Cap, in Brubaker's Winter Soldier first arc in the opening, there's a brief interlude where they tie into House of M, and it's what if Cap doesn't get frozen? And the story is essentially he's about to get honored for a medal, and he's like 90 years old, and he hates the world because it's kind of what S.H.I.E.L.D. has made it, and it doesn't line up with his worldview, when it's all about the fact that he's a soldier that never changed.
Captain
Well, the big
Curmudgeon.
difference, that's great, Steve. The big difference between S.H.I.E.L.D. and Captain America, and really Fury and Captain America, is that Captain America is the guy who jumps on the grenade to save everyone,
Yeah.
and Fury is the guy who puts somebody else in front of the grenade for whatever he thinks is the bigger, more important mission.
Yeah.
And the thing is that there is some truth to his way of looking at things. You know, there is a certain amount of, we have to know when sacrifices must be made.
Yeah, I mean, Nick Fury's in a position where he can't really allow himself to be like Captain America anyway, because when you're in a position of power in the government or in the military, you have no choice but to look at things from a consequentialist, utilitarian kind of perspective. And it shows. Like, the way Project Insight's structured is exactly like Jeremy Bentham's prison design, where the enemies always have to hide and they never know when they're being surveyed. And that guy's the father of consequentialism and utilitarianism. So there's truth to his argument because he has to talk about the largest amount of people. But the problem is, at that point, you kind of fail what the world ought to be in trying to get obsessed with what the world is.
And isn't it almost impossible to have any perspective?
Yeah.
We should talk about the Smithsonian thing, because I think what they built here is just marvelous. It's exactly what you would expect the Smithsonian to do if Captain America really existed, and I almost wish they would do like a maybe they did, but I doubt it. I wish they would do like a short stint of just building this there and letting people see it for a couple weeks and just pretend like it's real.
Oh, that'd be so cool. It's a really nice exhibit, and this clip with Peggy Carter is really well aged. It looks like it would be from 40s or 50s.
And it's also neat just how much detail is in that exhibit, like all the dates and ages and things. You can glean a whole lot of information from that, and also that scene is really important for making this a direct sequel to Captain America: First Avenger, because a whole lot of what was in that movie is kind of right there in that exhibit, and of course linking everything together with Peggy Carter here. I think we get away from this as a sequel to First Avenger pretty quickly, and of course it doesn't have sequelitis in any way whatsoever. It's not that movie at all. One of these is a war movie, is a period war movie, and one of these is a straight up spy thriller.
Also, it's great that they use Peggy to transition to the memory loss and themes of identity that we'd get with the Winter Soldier and Cap questioning his own place in the world, that potentially makes him forget who he is.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This scene was really kind of heart-wrenching, because I think a couple weeks before this movie came out, my grandfather died of Alzheimer's. So seeing this was like a real tearjerker.
Oh man.
Yeah.
I was so glad we got this scene because I expected it in First Avenger and we didn't get it.
Yeah. It's a scene they talked about doing with First Avenger, but they just kind of went over time with that.
Well, and the way they did it was really smart. I liked that we didn't, because it would have felt like the epilogue was just going and going and going, right?
Yeah.
Like if we weren't careful, it was really smart to have him just run out into Times Square, meet Nick Fury, and that's the end of it. And we know there's going to be more, because otherwise it might have felt, too much like the ending of Lord of the Rings or something.
Yeah, you're right. Evans's acting, by the way, here is just magnificent.
Yeah, I've never been more impressed with Chris Evans than in this movie. I obviously liked him a lot in First Avenger and The Avengers, but he puts on a clinic in this movie.
Yeah, it's great.
The thing about these Peggy Carter scenes that's awesome is I I thought the relationship in the first movie was fine. I wasn't like you know invested in the way that I've been invested in some romantic relationships in other movies I've seen. But watching the Agent Carter series and seeing her without Steve and how that affected her so deeply makes these scenes all the more touching. That's what I love about the Agent Carter series in general, and how it played into the Marvel stuff. It's rewarding to watch that stuff. It
and it's
enhances
all
the stuff
about
in the same
Steve's
way that
example.
yeah, exactly. And in the same way that this movie enhances some of the previous Marvel stuff, like Hap was talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's the great thing about Marvel Studios is that even if you don't like a movie right now, going forward, there's every possibility that something will make it better or more enjoyable at the very least. Like I really don't like Iron Man 2, but Iron Man 3 really makes up for it in my mind.
Yeah, I agree. I love Iron Man 3.
Yeah.
And there's some super neat tidbits in Agent Carter and some other things that call back to Iron Man 2 that are at the very least, are neat that they remembered and called back to. I mean, obviously that kind of stuff doesn't always make those movies better. I mean, when I say it makes them better, a lot of the time it's because you have a character that wasn't fleshed out enough, but now we know more about them. When you're talking about just straight up, well, like plot holes or continuity gaps or whatever, there's not a lot you can do about that. You want a movie to stand on its own, certainly, but we also have to remember that we're in a really weird and unique situation with Marvel Studios, with Marvel Cinematic, because they are movies that stand on their own, but then they're also the next installment. They are $300 to $500 million episodes of an ongoing television series. That's what they are.
Yeah. Whereas opposed to 22 pages, it's 2 hours and 20-minute comic book issues every year.
Yeah, I mean, I would say more like events, or at least like graphic novels that collect 6 or 8 issues.
Right.
Because you have a complete story. So I mean, I'm just saying that they're less like comic book issues in that we don't get just a fraction of a story, or at least we haven't made one like that yet. I could see a cliffhanger or something where you only got half a movie. We haven't done that yet. We'll see what Infinity War is like.
Yeah.
But
I think it's so cool that they got Robert Redford to be in this movie because he's famous for being in political spy thrillers from the 70s. That was kind of his big genre claim to fame. And he's a phenomenal actor. It's really cool that they got him to be in this movie. And I think Alexander Pierce is one of the more fascinating characters in this movie. I mean, I like all of them, and they're all really interesting. But I latched onto him specifically because it's hard to make the worldview that he has somewhat sympathetic, but when you look at characters like Nick Fury, who somewhat agree with him, and you see their argument, it's really interesting to hear a well-fleshed-out argument. It's the classic order versus freedom sort of thing. Do you crave a society that's regimented in the sense that nobody has any freedom, but you can guarantee safety and protection at the very least? That's the threshold for the social contract. Whereas if you allow people more freedom, there's bad things can happen, and what do you do in that situation? How do you balance that? How do you make a society that's acceptable in that regard?
Yeah, and the impossible kind of contradiction that someone in Pierce's position would hold, where he is the guy that institutes and orders all of the wars, but he himself never really faces the consequences of them, and still must look at them as if he's one of the people.
Right.
Something that Kant brings up all the time when he's talking about the problem with modern politics and like figures kind of like Alexander Pierce, where you can't expect us to blame him for everything, and then at the same time support everything he does, because he can't possibly understand the ramifications, and yet at the same time we can trust him to.
Well, I'm impressed that they didn't make him straight up evil, where you don't get to the end and think, well, he's just Hydra, so he has this really simplistic way of looking at things. And I think that we've had some Hydra characters in Agents of Shield now, and some other places that do come off that way a little bit, where it's sort of like, I'm just spewing a rhetoric, because it's easier to live that way, maybe because I really believe it. I don't know which, but like Steve was saying with Pierce, it's just that's an impossible position to be in.
Yeah, and I think also what's really cool about this is this is the kind of argument that Robert Redford himself was making against Max von Sydow in 3 Days of the Condor, and here it's inverted, and this movie's so much so based on that movie that in production they would jokingly call it 3 Days of Captain America.
Oh, that's great.
I almost wanted that title over Winter Soldier because it sounds so cool. So I know a lot of people call this the best action scene in the movie, this or the other highway fight. I know when I showed this to a couple of people, they literally jumped out of their seat when we get to some of the stuff near the end with the big truck and hitting the police car.
In the theater, this was one of the most visceral scenes I've ever experienced in a movie. I mean, I felt like I was there.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's so well done.
I had a physical reaction to this because I didn't see it coming, and it wasn't just kind of you jump out of your seat and then you go, okay, that was kind of a jump scare, whatever. I'm invested in this character because like you said earlier, I like him. I've been waiting for more stuff to happen with him, but also, I mean, like, this is insane. You've got all these police cars suddenly, showing up, and all these police trying to kill Nick Fury, and I think the movie does an excellent job of making all the technology that Shield has at their disposal make sense and make me buy that they would have that, and it's like it's sufficiently futuristic and better than what anybody else would have, and he's still losing.
Yeah.
So the stakes are really high. You buy everything that he's going through.
There's kind of a cool, almost Marxist sort of symbolism to the fact that the grunts, the soldiers, the workers are taking out this big figurehead of S.H.I.E.L.D. that stands for everything that they are fundamentally against. I'm not sure how much of that was on purpose, but it certainly feels like in a lot of ways Hydra feels like it's the underdog doing something that is more anti-Western capitalist and more in support of like Eastern Marxist sort of thought.
Well, isn't it
interesting that Fury would probably not have gotten as extreme in his worldview, though, if it weren't for the fact that Hydra had infiltrated S.H.I.E.L.D.
Yeah, that's true.
So they did somewhat create him. I mean, his worldview obviously was built somewhat before that, and we get that discussion of something that happened with him and Pierce in a mission earlier that helped to bring him to that and that kind of stuff. But I do get the sense that he's been manipulated some.
Yeah, he's been manipulated some, but he's also been the precedent for some of it. Like, he behaves as a Hydra agent before he becomes the ultimate S.H.I.E.L.D. agent.
That's right. And I think a lot of this is about extremism. He agrees with him to a point, but he wouldn't go all the way to let's control everyone. He does go all the way to let's point a gun at everybody's heads, but he thinks that he is trustworthy. He thinks that he has everybody's best intentions at heart.
Yeah. And he doesn't see the fact that trusting someone with that is exceptionally dangerous until Cap brings everything that Pierce is doing to light.
I think it's interesting what you were saying earlier, Steve, about how the Hydra kind of feels like the underdog, and I was going to say, like, all modern, well, not modern, but all popular, revolutions, their mantra is always turn the power over to the people, and that's how they win everybody over, and that's how they win the war in the first place. Because that's the basic message you have to be a popular revolution. And isn't it interesting that Black Widow's worldview is so similar to Nick Fury's, and she's a product of a society that went through that exact transformation, and she was, a part of an organization that fought for the, supposed popular revolution in the Soviet Union.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. This movie takes all of that on a very high macro level to make sure we understand like the ideologies at work. But then we go back to Iron Man 3, and it's almost exactly the same kinds of symbolism and themes and sort of corporate people, revolutionary ideologies, but on the micro level. And that Tony deals with it very differently into what Cap does, but they're fundamentally fighting against the same sorts of threats.
Yeah, and Iron Man 3 is all about corporate power, whereas this is all about governmental power.
Yeah, and there
Yeah, and
definitely the
isn't that
blurred lines
interesting?
between those two.
And
Yeah.
isn't that fascinating? Because we've been studying the differences between those two characters and the way we look at the world going all the way back.
Oh
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
And it'll be really interesting to see with Civil War how much of that will all come out to the forefront, right? Because I would assume that there's going to be uh, a lot of government and corporate stuff in that movie. Like surely after these two, and then you have those two kind of facing off. Surely that's the place where you do all of it.
I would
Yeah.
imagine that
I'd
movie.
be really surprised if they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't imagine that movie would somewhat have to be about the merging of government and corporate power, which is, what we've been seeing in our society over the past, several decades,
Yeah, things like Citizen
if not
United
longer
and
than that.
debates like that would certainly get played into that film. So where'd all the dirt go?
Where did all the dirt
He
go?
can cut through the
And
floor, but he still has to place the dirt somewhere. Unless you
and
can
where did
destroy matter now.
and I know that Nick Fury's got futuristic technology, but where did he get a sonic screwdriver?
Yeah, one of the very minor gripes there. But yeah, I think also what's really cool is that the Russos are doing Civil War, and I feel like that's the only people I would trust with handling ideas like this.
Yeah.
I know Cap and I we disagreed about this quite a bit when it was first announced, but I'm really on board, especially considering how much I love this movie. And it's the same guys responsible for it.
Well, I really want to see that just because I think it could be handled better. I mean, I'm hoping, and it's been a while since I've read it, so I might have a different opinion on it if I read it now. But like, I really think that we could be looking, and I'm hoping we are at something like, I guess, we're dating this commentary a lot right now, but like with Red Hood versus the movie, Under the Red Hood.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. Were
I
you guys
love
bothered
the
by the fact? Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, talking about the Russos, I was going to talk about Marvel's eye for talent in getting the people to work on these movies.
Yeah.
And I think they've taken the way that Marvel does its business in the comic books to find talent to the movies. And we talk about that all the time, how they take their business practices in the comics and bring them to the movie, and it's been very successful for them.
That's right.
Yeah.
Marvel all the time, whenever there's an indie creator in the scene and they're doing something really exciting and people really like it, but it's sometimes it's a little bit under the radar, like Jason Aaron was doing Scalped at Image and things like that before Marvel picked him up. Marvel immediately snatches those people up and gets some exclusive contracts, gives them their biggest characters, and says, "All right, you have this toy to play with, run with it. Let's see what you can give us." And they're doing the same thing with TV directors, which a lot of people are saying TV is better than movies right now, and all of the best storytelling on film is being done on TV. They're pulling from those people. They got the Russos, and then the guy who directed Thor 2 was a TV director as well. He did episodes of Game of Thrones.
Although
So
with
I
Thor,
think,
I think it made more sense because the Russos did Community, which is just a TV sitcom about kids in community college.
yeah, which is extraordinary that they were able to see something in these guys that's obviously there. They're extremely talented people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and they make the kind of action movie that we don't see anymore. I can tell what's going on.
Yeah, yeah, really. No more shaky cam nonsense with this film.
No, it's fascinating. You've really got to wonder what they were thinking when they went to them. Like what else have they done that nobody else has seen or whatever? Like you've really got to wonder what was going on there.
Well, what's cool is that they gave them absolutely free reign. Like Marvel fought them on a couple of things, but ultimately the Russos got pretty much everything they wanted out of this movie their way.
It sounds like they fought Marvel a lot less than James Gunn did with Guardians.
Yeah, and Alan Taylor with Thor. This is still a really great scene. This is primarily one of the scenes that Marvel had a bit of a problem with that we'll get into. Not the Nick Fury stuff, but when Cap's about to embark on this chase after the Winter Soldier, they were immensely worried that this is making Cap look too much like the Hulk, and he's not the Hulk. But
In what way? The Hulk?
we'll see in a second when he's like busting through walls and doors and kicking things like they're paper. Um, but they won him over by saying that this is the only way to show the fact that Steve's got superpowers.
Yeah, it's a demonstration of his power. You got to have that. I think it's very difficult to show just how powerful Captain America is a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I mean, his abilities are limited. He's got super strength, but he doesn't have like Superman level super strength.
Exactly, and they were able to make that work. Like, see stuff like this where he's just like flooring through the door and blasting through the windows and stuff like that. Like, they were concerned that this was making him look either too powerful or the wrong kind of powerful. But Marvel was ultimately wrong, and the Russos got their way, and it worked.
Although I think that if you have that shield and you are able to jump that far, it's not your super strength that's busting through that window.
That's true. Bucky's arm
now the
shot's destroyed,
doors,
by the way.
you're right, but yeah, it is fun when he runs into drywall like that. Although I will say that if I'm running that fast and I've got a shield made out of vibranium, not that I can lift it, but if I'm running that fast and I've got a shield made out of vibranium, I'm pretty sure I'm going to put that big of a dent in drywall also.
Potentially, yes.
If Marvel can make Sharon Carter into as cool of a character as Peggy is, that's going to be awesome in Civil War.
Oh yeah, that's what
I hope she gets more to do.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to mention earlier. Is that were you guys bothered with the fact that they don't call her Sharon Carter? They just call her Sharon.
Yeah, I am, because I didn't know that until like a couple of months ago. I had no idea she was Sharon Carter.
Hello? Oh, there we go.
I'm here.
Okay.
Yep.
I thought we got stuck there for a second.
Yeah,
No,
Cap froze on me for a minute there.
Oh, sorry about that. I was thinking. No, I'm kidding.
So
and when I say Cap, I mean Captain Logan.
yeah. That's been confusing here and there. Like, I love it when people compare me to Iron Man. That's awesome. Yeah, we have different ways. No, we don't. I am just as arrogant as that guy. Colby Smulders, I like a lot. I know we talked about her some in Avengers. I really appreciated that she was in this, and not that she's given a ton to do, but you really get the sense of her as Nick Fury's right hand man, and she does a good job of attempting to compose herself when it looks like he's dying, and I don't know. I just think she gives a good performance.
Kind of makes you wonder why she's not director of S.H.I.E.L.D. instead of Coulson.
Yeah, it does.
That's a great. I'm pretty sure he's director of S.H.I.E.L.D. because there's a TV show called Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And let's for a moment during this really important depressing scene talk about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So I really, really liked what they did with that show in setting up this movie and then some of what they did right after it. However, and we'll talk about some of that later with Sitwell, but when you're watching this movie and you've been watching Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it becomes really, really glaring just how much of a TV budget you're looking at when you watch that show. Because we go to the Triskelion in this, and it's just like, this doesn't even feel like the same organization, you know?
Yeah, I agree. It's like
and a lot of people complain about that, and I think they're maybe right about it.
And I wasn't on that side until this movie came out. Like, for the TV budget we got for the first half of that season, I thought it looked really good. And then you compare it to the Triskelion and the helicarriers and stuff.
Boy, Dan sure liked to complain about the size of the airplane, though.
They even reference in the show how, like, archaic their airplane is in the first season of that show.
Oh, they do, don't they?
It seemed like just a weird contrivance thing to do something on a budget. And I also, like, so they've got this really archaic technology on the airplane, but then you get the end of the second episode where they have the Nick Fury cameo, and he's like, "You messed up my awesome airplane." I don't know what's going on there. And the fish tank, Coulson the fish tank. So, did you guys have any doubts at all that you would see Nick Fury show back up somewhere in the second act?
Nick Fury fakes his job like it's his job.
You mean his death?
Yes, he fakes his death like it's his job.
He fakes his job like it's his death!
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting tired.
He BS's everything, and he's like he's dead.
Yeah, like he just has life model decoys that go around and, you know, sometimes do evil things in his name, and then you find out, oh, it's just a Nick Fury robot that he wasn't keeping track of in the comics all the time. So I was like, yeah, Nick Fury's not dead.
And if anyone disagrees with your point, just read Original Sin, because that's all that is about.
That's what I was gonna say, and they go all the way with it too. Like you find out that you haven't been reading real Nick Fury in a long time.
This is a great exchange, by the way, when she calls him Captain America and he just calls her neighbor. What's really cool about this is that Steve is still the skinny little kid he was in the first movie, where he can't lie, he doesn't know how to fake things, and he still can't talk to girls.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
Uh,
And that's fun. That's fun because that comes from world experiences, you know? Just because you're this, big ripped super soldier and you've kind of saved the world once doesn't mean that you would be great at everything that you were never good at before. And I think this movie also does a good job of I just thought of this, Steve, from what you said, that this movie does a pretty good job of taking into account that Captain America didn't go on a lot of adventures.
no, he didn't exactly. It because he has to be retrained for a lot of this stuff, and he doesn't really get the way a lot of military operations work, and he's not comfortable with a lot of the way they work. So it's cool that this is not only like him learning how to be more of a proper soldier, but understanding that maybe his calling in World War II is fundamentally different from the one he has now, and there's nothing keeping him at Shield aside from the fact that this is all he knows.
Sometimes from the side, Robert Redford looks a little bit like Mark Hamill.
Oh yeah, he kind of does. I didn't see that. Um, he's still one of my favorite actors, and he's just great in this movie. The way he's just kind of manipulating Cap into trying to give up as much as he can just because he knows Cap won't lie to him into his face, and he doesn't. He doesn't lie about anything really. He just kind of shifts around the questions.
I think some of the success of this movie is just how extremely different it is tonally and pacing wise from the other films before it in Marvel Cinematic. I like the way these scenes just like take their time and breathe and feel like they're really happening, and you don't feel like you've got actors just like reading the dialogue we need to hurry up and propel us to the next scene. It doesn't feel like an action movie. I mean, it is an action movie, but it feels like a proper action movie where the action is serving the story, and the most of the important stuff is done in dialogue exchanges.
Or it feels like a real 70s political thriller. Like it's mapped out and it's structured and its revelations are exactly timed with how a Robert Redford 70s All the President's Men or 3 Days of the Condor or
Yeah.
Marathon Man would reveal things to you.
Mhm.
The,
Well, I shouldn't sorry, I shouldn't say that all the important stuff happens in dialogue. Obviously, if the action is serving the story, then there is important stuff that happens in the action. But I just mean that these aren't just throwaway scenes to get us to the next set piece.
yeah, they're
Right.
all
It's
crucial.
yeah, it's the total opposite of what happened with Thor 2, where like major you know parts that gave us the motivation for the villain of the movie were cut out in favor of propelling us faster to the next action scene.
Yeah, the same kind of thought process that went into the theatrical release for the Daredevil movie, and you can just see
Yeah.
how action can serve the story, and story needs action every now and then. But you can't just gut a movie to make it nothing but fast paced, or it doesn't work at all, and people pick up on that.
And we have this idea in Hollywood sometimes that, well, if all the people are there for in the first place is action, then we don't need to make a compelling movie. We don't need to create characters that they care about. We just need to make it a ride. And it's interesting. This is not always the case, but a lot of the time the cream does rise to the crop. And it's very interesting that people do go to movies for that. Hollywood is right about this, right? Like people do go to movies for the explosions and the fighting and stuff. But there's something that happens to people on a subconscious level where they find themselves really caring about people and the characters and getting invested and not knowing why. And those of us that study this stuff, we can kind of dissect it and maybe we think we understand why. But like that stuff is important, and a lot of the time you find that those are the movies that succeed.
Yeah,
And when those people walk out of the theater, they're not talking about how much they love the characters half the time. They're talking about how great the action was. But what will make them come and see it a second time is not the explosions.
Exactly.
yeah, exactly. So this is kind of cool. When Thor: The Dark World came out in theaters, I think almost 2-3 years ago at this point. They Marvel released a 5-minute clip that would go in front of the movie And if you saw it in 3D, you'd get this clip where he's beating everyone up in the elevator. And it gets capped off with a scene that didn't make the movie where Bucky picks up. Oh yeah, capped off. It gets ended off with a scene that didn't make the movie where the Winter Soldier is just walking across the street and picks up Cap's shield, and it's got a really strange mechanical Terminator voice for his arm that they don't use in the final cut, but it's kind of there every now and then.
Oh, that's bizarre. I love the tension in this elevator scene. This movie has such a good sense of suspense. And again, I mean, this works because we're not rushing it.
Yeah.
That we keep letting more guys on and letting more guys on, and I mean, you know what's going to happen, but part of the reason it works is because they make you wait so long for it. And by the way, anybody familiar with comics would not know this was Crossbones.
Yeah.
Unless they read that it was Crossbones.
Yeah. Even if you know the character from the comics, there's not a lot of Crossbones in this guy.
Anyway, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, I think it's cool, to your point about you know what's going to happen. It's cool that they acknowledge that everyone in the elevator knows what's going to happen, too, and that's why the scene is so tense in the first place.
Oh, yeah. And this is just gets to confirm that.
It's a wonderful use of inserts, too. We're seeing some of those now where Steve is picking up on the perspiration and all these different little clues that tell him what's about to happen, because we know what's about to happen because of the way the scene is shot, and nothing else, right? Steve knows because he's a smart, intuitive guy, and it's important to make a character with super strength intelligent.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can't. Your message will always be might makes right, no matter what you intended to do.
Yeah, and I mean, he's got battle training. He picks up on it. And, like, there's formational stuff in the way everyone's structured around. So he's actually using the stuff S.H.I.E.L.D.'s taught him to beat some of these guys up, too.
That's a great point. I was just about to say, has Steve maybe learned how to not be as trusting, and he doesn't realize it and doesn't want to acknowledge that himself, right? I mean, yeah. That's pretty cool. So I said that that these are always stories about a guy who refuses to change, but there's a certain amount of change that happens inherently. He's also always resisting it. And the reason that it's still interesting and we care, because stories aren't always, it's not a formula. It's not always just about a character becoming a totally different person by the end, that they have a capital letters character arc. It's about who they are and what we learn about them, and sometimes about why a character doesn't change. And so if that's what your movie's about, you've got to throw all this stuff at him to try to force him to change.
And I mean, importantly, change and adapting are two very distinct things. So Steve's not changing, but he's at least adapting to the circumstances and using what he wants to be in the most acceptable way with what he's given.
There's sure a lot of falling in this movie.
Yeah, I know people had a problem with Steve falling like that and not hurting himself, but Vibranium Shield absorbs all the impact.
Yeah, and he lands mostly. He's mostly curled up on it, so that's fine. And also, I would imagine his super strength would allow him to take that kind of a fall better than if I threw Steve off a roof.
Yeah, exactly.
Which Steve are you talking about?
You decide. You be the judge, Dan.
It works for both of you.
yeah, that was hilarious. I should have said Dan.
They kept this scene in, and right after this, there was actually an extended scene where he kind of goes into the main city where he's chased by more S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, and that's where Hawkeye shows up.
Okay.
And they were supposed to end that big fight between Hawkeye and Steve with what Hawkeye's view of S.H.I.E.L.D. is, and whether or not he agrees with it, he still has an obligation, and whether it's about more of an honor thing to him than it is about an ideological thing for him.
And see, that gets really interesting when you have S.H.I.E.L.D. agents that are like that, because you're loyal to this organization, but should you be if they're not loyal to you?
Yeah, and they were going to bring that up. There was supposed to be a very heated exchange between Hawkeye and Cap right here, but Jeremy Renner's schedule conflicted and they couldn't film it.
And that's one of the big complaints people had about it. And when that's your big complaint, you've got a pretty darn good movie on your hands.
Yeah.
But something I wanted to say about the elevator scene earlier that I totally forgot about was, this is neither here nor there, but when I was writing my trivia book and working on this movie, I was gonna do a question about how many men were in that elevator, and I just never got a good enough shot to figure out exactly how many there were. They give you a really good overhead shot where you can kind of count them, but there's a couple that are a little bit off frame, and I just wasn't sure. I almost had it. It was at least 20. I think. I don't remember.
Must have been a big elevator.
I never ended up writing it. So when you're in S.H.I.E.L.D. and you suddenly get this memo of Captain America is a traitor, like what do you do with that? Like surely you can't immediately buy it. There's got to be especially when you're in an organization that's all about not trusting people. There's got to be a part of you that immediately goes, yeah, no, there's no way.
Yeah. And I mean, they proved that a little bit with them. We had like Sharon questioning if we're going to go out to Captain America, we deserve to know why. And then later on, when they don't fire on the helicopters after Cap's speech, and the guy says Captain's orders.
Did you ever think you would see a movie where Black Widow is kind of your comic relief?
Yeah, that's a good point.
That is fascinating, and it totally works. I mean, she just takes all this completely in stride, and I think that it's a defense mechanism.
Yeah, it totally is. When she gets,
I think she's playing
like,
this.
Who do you want me to be? And it's all about what makes her comfortable and what works, but not really how she feels or how it admits how she feels.
Yeah, and she's able to manipulate those feelings in others, as we see with Loki and stuff in Avengers.
Yeah.
So she completely understands human behavior, and I think that's why she's so good at hiding what she really thinks herself.
And we get a lot more of that when they're escaping from the mall, and she's kind of cueing him in on stuff that he can do to make people avoid them.
Dan, what do you think?
I really like Scarlett Johansson's performance in this movie. I think it's the best performance she's given in any of the movies so far. Not that she's bad in any of them. I just think that Scarlett Johansson is an actress that I think is really into that sort of character stuff. Like, that's why she takes roles, and she's finally getting to do the big character kind of movie for Black Widow, and you can see that she's more invested in it than some of the other stuff she's done. That's really one of the complaints Jeremy Renner had with the Avengers, was he was like, I signed on to play this really cool character, like the way they talked about him. I was really fascinated to play this guy, and I didn't get to do that in the movie. And I feel like maybe Scarlett Johansson had similar misgivings, potentially. I mean, I don't know. She's never went on record and said that like Renner did, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I just get the feeling that she cares a little more about it in this.
Yeah, she doesn't really talk about how she feels about the movies, so I really have no sense of like whether she enjoyed making this or not. But she's clearly liking herself, at least in this role, as compared to what she did in Iron Man 2. But I thought she was really good in Avengers too.
She was.
When she manipulated Loki, the god of tricksters, she was able to fake out and get his plan. I thought that was a beautifully acted scene.
It was.
Speaking of scenes, this that's a terrible segue.
Speaking of scene, here's one.
But this scene where they're in the computer shop, this is the one scene I really don't like. And we're about to see why when Cap has to talk to the guy with the long hair. I thought that was completely unnecessary and awkward for no reason. I don't get the point of the scene.
Maybe I was okay with it just because of the context of the rest of it. It never even occurred to me to really scrutinize. I do like the business. I think it's right after this on the escalator when she says public displays of affection make people uncomfortable.
Oh yeah, I like all that. It's just like this one guy's cameo. It's completely superfluous. It's one of the only things in the entire movie that they did not need at all.
You're just complaining because it's not Kevin Smith.
If there was Kevin Smith, I'd get it. But it's
you
not.
think that guy should be Kevin Smith?
If it was a
cameo. And that he's not rambling on about Star Wars. But no, is that someone? Is that a person?
I have no idea.
I mean, clearly it's as much as this is a scene, but
I have no idea. I know there's a cameo from an actor from Community later on, but I don't recognize that guy from anything, so I don't know what the point of it was. Maybe it's that Mac stores are frequented by people with very long hair and beards, but I don't know.
Well, frequented. He works there.
Oh yeah, he does. But
He walks up and asks them if they need any help. I do think it's really funny that I forget where they're like, we're gonna go take our honeymoon in the estate right next to our estate.
yeah, we're going to New Jersey. That's great.
Yeah, that's great. Wait, oh yeah, that is really. We're gonna go to New Jersey, and I also do kind of think that him calling Captain America a specimen's pretty funny.
Yeah, I guess that's all right.
Specimen. Well, cause he is. He was a science project. Steve, the scene is fine, and you are looking for something to complain about so that people don't say that you're not critical of this film. That's what's happening right now.
But I'm
just kidding.
This is a really good scene though, right here. A reference to
Speaking of scenes.
Yeah, speaking of scenes. Call back to the old Captain America movie where they kind of do this. But it's a really good exchange between Cap and Black Widow.
Do you think that was intentional?
I don't know.
That it was kind of like are you talking about the 1990 movie?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I'm just glad that at no point is he like, I need to throw up.
Yeah, I have no idea if it's intentional or not, but it certainly looks a lot like it. And I mean, they were still driving through a forest and everything in that scene for that movie, so...
I'm hoping that in Civil War we get a flashback where we find out that the president became the president because he saw Captain America, like, fly over him.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
That's how we got President Matthew Ellis, because he saw Captain America as a child.
Yes, exactly, because that makes sense.
Yeah, again, very well acted scene, and this is to kind of go back to more political thriller territory. This is kind of what happens in most of those movies. The main character and usually a woman or his partner, and in this case it's both, drive out of town. They're runaways. They completely change their uniforms, and right about halfway through the movie or at the start of the second half is when we get the revelations of what's really going on with Zola.
It's really cool that, this movie was based on a genre that doesn't really exist anymore in modern cinema. Like, we don't really do political thrillers anymore.
No, I think the closest we've gotten really with political thrillers is maybe this and Iron Man 3.
I think we kind of attempt them, but they're usually kind of shallow. Like I would argue that a lot of suspense thrillers right now are political thrillers, but they kind of all feel the same, so they're really easy to forget and ignore. Like there was one I saw. Well, I guess that was still kind of a spy thing, but there was one I saw last year or the year before, I forget, with Kevin Costner. That was kind. I think, what was it? Kevin Costner and Chris Pine?
Oh, Jack Ryan, Shadow Recruit.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a political thriller.
Yeah, and Jack Ryan movies were made around the exact same era, doing the exact same thing. So yeah.
Okay, so we make them, but only when they're based on some other thing from a lot earlier. Okay.
Apparently.
I'm just saying that I don't 100% agree with you that we just don't do them, but I think it's like Westerns where we kind of do them, but not very often, and they're not really a thing now.
Right.
Or at least for the most part, the general masses that are making those particular thrillers don't get what made the classics the classics. The way the Russos got why something like 3 Days of the Condor was so popular, and they did that with this movie.
I really want Agent Carter to get another season, or something to somehow give us this building in the past.
Yeah.
Because we just haven't had it. I didn't watch that Agent Carter short that they did, so maybe this was in that. I'm not sure, because I know that's what like sets up Shield in the first place. So maybe this is in that, and I don't know it, but
I don't remember if that's what it was in the Agent Carter short, but I haven't seen that since it first came out, and that's been at least a year or two at this point.
I remembered Peggy Carter and Howard Stark's pictures being there, but I forgot that the General's picture was there.
Oh yeah, it is. Tommy Lee Jones.
Tommy Lee Jones character, yeah. I forget, was he a general or a sergeant?
General.
Yeah, I got it right the first time. I just couldn't think of Tommy Lee Jones, so I said the General.
He's awesome in that movie, though.
I should have said Agent K. I didn't realize Agent K's picture was there.
Maybe Agent K, or maybe Tommy Lee Jones in that movie was secretly Agent K in disguise, and he
Or
helped
maybe
found
he,
Shield.
or maybe he didn't know that he was Agent K because he got flashy thingied.
Yeah, it all makes sense if you think about Men in Black 3 and time travel.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Maybe it happened because of the time travel, and that's why he looks that old.
Yeah, it's perfect. It makes complete
See, it
sense.
makes perfect sense.
Um, this
Perfect
is a
sense.
really cool set. I love this. This is so nicely made, so retro with the way the computers are designed. And getting Zola on a computer screen is all I've ever wanted in a Captain America movie.
It's neat. I mean, besides the fact that we've got a super soldier, it's neat that we get this far in before we get anything really sci-fi. I mean, I guess we've got Nick Fury's car and stuff, but I mean, like, but you could say that that's as sci-fi as 007 ever was.
Well, Devil's
Like,
hoping to go to space and had lasers, so.
okay, maybe not ever, but most of the time. But
And
like,
tsunami machines powered by diamonds.
okay, you're right. And then there was that thing with the beam from the sun that
Yeah.
has the swaths.
Yeah.
Okay, you're right. But I like that. I think this movie helps. Like keep itself grounded and keep the audience sucked into all of the ideas and the character stuff. So by the time we get to this, and I don't think it's jarring, but it's kind of fun that suddenly we're like, oh yeah, we're in a comic book universe where this kind of crazy crap is possible.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And it helps to make this part of that vibe instead of just doing silly comic book stuff for the sake of doing silly comic book stuff. I did not expect this, and I was really excited about it. And if Zola doesn't ever come back and we never get to see him in the chest of the guy, who cares? Because this was an inspired choice.
This is the perfect place to put him. And they made a big deal of the fact that they cast him when this movie was in production. And everyone expected a walking, talking robot.
That's why I said I didn't expect it. I knew he was going to be in the movie somewhere, but
yeah, it's a really cool choice. I love the way it's kind of faded. You don't completely see his face, but it's still very distinctly his voice. Two real quick things about the scene. I love that we stop the jokes about Captain America not getting pop culture references. It was really funny in Avengers, but we've kind of capped it off here when Cap got the War Games joke.
Oh, you said it again.
I did, and
no, you're right. But it works because at the very beginning of the movie, we have him with a list, and we know he's been watching stuff, so it's totally fine.
Yeah, exactly.
But I would argue that you still are carrying the joke a little bit because, okay, I get that. You don't have to assume that I've never watched anything now, okay? I've had time. I don't spend all my time just punching bags and having a row of them in case I knock one down.
I just mean, like, it's not at his expense anymore. Because he's now kind of caught up there. The other thing is, I don't really know how I feel about the Winter Soldier not being a Russian thing.
See, I have no opinion on that because I wasn't real familiar with the character before this.
Because Brubaker did name him the Winter Soldier not only for what Dan mentioned when we did the spoiler podcast about the idea of the Summer Soldier and stuff like that, but also the Vietnam soldiers who were called the Winter Soldiers who obeyed orders and killed civilians and then stood up for the fact that wasn't the right thing to do. But additionally, in the comic, he's called the Winter Soldier because after Cap and Bucky save the Russian village, there's a Russian general that wants to take all of the Nazi technology, and Cap doesn't let him. And he says that you can stand on the moral high ground because you've got super soldiers, but all the Russians have is their winter. And that's essentially how they survive the war for the most part, is because of the Russian winter. And so when he makes the Winter Soldier, the last thing he says to him is that you are my sick joke to the Americans and the Germans.
Yeah, that's really cool stuff.
And it's not a bad thing that that's not part of the movie. It's just that's so fascinating, and they didn't use it.
That is really cool, but I think they find alternatives to make it still be at least a double entendre. It's not a quadruple entendre, like what you're talking, like what you're talking about almost is. But I mean, like, one of the places my mind went to is he's at least in Russia. I mean, yeah, it's not that we don't have all the same stuff because he's not Russian, but also, it's done through cryofreeze.
Yeah, that's there. It's still really good. It still really works.
I'm just saying it doesn't make no sense.
No, it's not that it doesn't make any sense.
And I know some people have watched the movie and been like, why is he called that? It's like, well, pretty much because that's what he was called about in the comics.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really have a problem with the way they did it. It's just that was something in the comic that was really legitimately fascinating about the character. And in the comic, he's barely in it. He's only in it for a couple of pages for the first 13 issues, and then he's there for a few pages in the last issue. So he's nothing but an idea and a mechanic and a device to get Steve's character to a place, just like this movie.
I love that Zola just keeps taunting them until the building finally explodes.
Oh yeah, that's great.
It's like he just keeps monologuing and monologuing.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Now, I had some cool character stuff I found when I did First Avenger in my rewind that I think doesn't fully end up paying off because Zola kind of just keeps believing in the in the Hydra philosophy because that's where he was, and we need somebody to do all of that. Where I kind of thought he was sort of just trying to keep himself alive, and in First Avenger, in continuing to work with Red Skull. But I mean, I don't think it's inconsistent. I just think there was a little bit of not conflict, but just kind of going where the powers seem to be. And I guess maybe that's still there if he's believing that Hydra can really take over Shield, but it's just so underground.
Well, I mean, his choice was stay in jail or be recruited into Operation Paperclip, so I feel like that still kind of works.
Okay, so he's still got that.
Yeah. So I think that's still a little bit there. It's a little bit different.
He's still an opportunist. Yeah. Some people have questioned how in the world Zola knew that anybody was coming after them right there.
Well, we saw clearly that the device that they plug the flash drive into is brand new and it was disturbed, so he could have been tipped off or turned on somewhere before that. The Cap and Widow showed up.
Oh, I see. Like before. So when he's monologuing, he knows how much time he's got. Because he really seems really calculated, like he knows how much time he's got.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I think it's just the delivery. One of my favorite lines in that scene is when he says, "The answer to your question is fascinating." He's like, "But too bad you won't be around to see it." and that's amusing because that's just such an old school like Silver Age comic kind of line.
Oh yeah, it's fast. In First Avenger, I love First Avenger, but one of my biggest reservations was casting Sebastian Stan as Bucky because I didn't think he could pull off the Winter Soldier should they eventually do it. And was I completely wrong? Because he's so good.
He pulls it off so well that I had to go back and look and make sure it was the same actor. I wasn't sure it was still the same guy.
Yeah, but like just in that scene before, like with his eyes and just staring intently and everything, like he barely gets a lot to anything to do in a lot of scenes, but he carries that Terminator vibe so well.
Oh yeah, I love the way you put that. I'm just glad he doesn't get any silly one-liners.
I sort of resisted them doing the Winter Soldier in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in general because I didn't feel like there was enough of a relationship between Cap and Bucky in the first Avenger. It wasn't developed enough for me to potentially be emotionally invested in a conflict where Steve is fighting his old sidekick. But I think the movie isn't necessarily about Cap's personal struggle with Bucky. It's more about the larger picture, and the fact that Bucky is the Winter Soldier is just a even more terrifying thing for him as the story unfolds. It's not all about that, like, in the way that like Under the Red Hood is all about the fact that Jason Todd was killed by the Joker and he comes back and Batman and him have a personal relationship.
And I think importantly, it isn't also not at all about that, but I think that because of the way things play on the helicarrier in the third act, I think that that's used to present the contrasting worldview and Steve's larger ideology of care about everyone, throw no one under the bus.
Right. Yeah.
And so that whole thing at the end that I think is really poignant when he says, "I'm here till the end of the line." Yeah, that was his best friend, but I think he would feel that way about any soldier that he had worked with.
Right.
And certainly, you know, we have a Captain America that, because he's a soldier, is willing to kill people and he's willing to throw, you know, knives through people's hands, in gruesome scenes on a warship. But he knows that this guy is being, coerced and used against his will. Dan, I do think that's still a problem. I do think to a degree, and I think that the movie is so good. That it goes as far as it can, you know, to make all that work. But man, if you didn't know who Bucky was when you watched First Avenger, I really don't think that the general audience would have remembered that character walking into this movie.
That's true, but I
I
think
really don't.
I think part of it also is that it's not really the fact that Steve's trying to figure out what's wrong with his best friend, as much as it's Steve reclaiming the fact that everything that he fought for is now gone. And when he says, even when I had everything, I had even when I had nothing, I had Bucky. The same way, even when he had nothing, he still got this completely altruistic worldview. It's more of, in saving Bucky, he proves that his way of doing things is the right way to do it, and less about the fact that he's trying to save his best friend, as much as he's trying to save for the kind of stuff he lives for in Bucky.
And that's precisely the point I was making.
I know a lot of people are bothered by that, but I mean, they didn't make any bones about the fact that Bucky was the Winter Soldier. Like, everybody knew. In the movie, it's played a little bit like a reveal, but everybody knew going in. And even in the comic, you knew it was Bucky from, like, issue 1 or 2. It was just took Steve that long to admit it.
That's because bringing a character back from the dead in comics is exactly like killing one. You know that a major character, if they're going to die, you know it 6 months before it happens. In exactly the same way that if we bring one back, we know it 6 months before it happens.
Yeah. But I mean, like, there was character posters and stuff like that. Like, everybody, if you didn't know Bucky was Winter Soldier going in, it's because you actively avoided everything possible for this movie.
But what I can't believe is that they managed to keep the Hydra reveal under their hats. Because I mean, I didn't know it going in, and that's what made the movie for me. That was amazing. I mean, like, this movie feels so much more game changing and so much more important than Avengers. And and also makes a really good argument, I think, against folks that thought that up until this point the Marvel movies were just popcorn fun and there was nothing to them. And I still don't think that's true, but I think this movie is making a really good argument for that's not what we're making. And or at least with this one, there's a lot more going on with it.
This one proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that Marvel Studios is a studio and that they are capable of things that are more than just superhero movies in a shared universe.
I mean, it's always going to have that component to it, but isn't it cool that this and Guardians came out the same year?
Yeah, I was going to say they proved it twice in the same summer, the point that you were making, that they're a studio that does vastly different things.
Yeah, I think it's cool that Sitwell's the Hydra agent that they get out, because in the comics, after Bucky dies in Fear itself and he's kind of like a invisible agent that everyone thinks is gone, his handler is Jasper Sitwell.
Oh, really? That's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was a comic character.
Yeah, he's really, really minor, and he looks quite a bit different in the comics, and he's a little bit nicer and not as evil in the comics.
He's just not as evil.
But he's still kind of a slimy guy, and that's kind of cool that he's the same way in this movie.
Yeah, he's just a worm in this, and he was introduced in one of the earlier movies.
Yeah.
And I forget which one. Was it?
He was in a lot of shorts leading up to Avengers, and then he was in Avengers.
I thought he was in one of the Thor movies, but I could be wrong about that.
He may have been in the first Thor movie. There was a lot of S.H.I.E.L.D. agents in that movie, so he could have been there.
Jasper Sitwell also gets the privilege of uttering the line of dialogue that made me stand up and shout in the theater. I was so excited about it. And we'll see
and
it.
No one else did.
Yeah.
Oh, that was
no one
such
else
a great
did.
line.
But then when they see the movie that Cumberbatch is going to be in, they will understand.
They'll go back and they'll be like, man, I don't know. I thought that Winter Soldier movie was kind of depressing, but I love Doctor Strange, so that made this a better movie too.
Doctor Strange will retroactively make this movie better. I agree.
And once again, I love the way this whole thing was set up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. there's a mention of him going on the boat. He's like, "Oh, I've got to go on a boat."
Oh yeah, that was there.
And then he leaves, and there's this really cool moment, and it's been a while since I've seen it, so I'm trying to remember who it was. Where I can't remember if he makes eye contact with Coulson or what it is, but there's a line that actually telegraphs both Hydra and his being a double agent, or his being a traitor to Shield, and he says something that makes it like totally clear once you've seen it, and he's got this look on his face. It's really cool.
I need to go back and watch that.
It's been a while, so I don't remember. I don't know what I'm talking about right now, but I know it's there. It's just been a while since I've seen it. I talked about it when we did the spoiler podcast, and I was a lot more articulate about it.
I mean, I haven't seen that season in a while, but I kind of want to go back and watch that. Another couple of things. The yellow truck that just killed Sitwell is the same truck they used for the cars that were chasing Nick Fury. And there's some kind of weird theory that that's the Punisher driving, but that's ridiculous because it's way too convenient. The other thing is I can't decide if S.H.I.E.L.D. is too cheap or too expensive when it comes to giving their agents Joseph A. Banks suits. Because those are both expensive and cheap at the same time.
You gotta explain that, Steve.
You can tell by the lining that Jasper Sitwell's wearing a Joseph A. Banks suit. And
no, I know, but I don't understand what cheap and expensive means.
They are both run for $700 a piece to $700 for 4. So they are both cheap and expensive simultaneously.
So Steve is not only our philosophy expert, but he's also our male fashion expert.
I buy a lot of suits, so.
Wow. Every now and again you'll say a thing like that, and I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot. You like keep up with random everything.
So this is my favorite action scene in the movie because it's fantastic.
I mean, it looks great, but I still think the best action scene is Fury almost getting killed at the beginning.
That's completely fair. It's just I love the music in this one, particularly when we get the Winter Soldier's theme, and the fact that it's people screaming slowed down.
Really?
Oh my God! Is it really?
Yeah. That's what they would use for some of the main bits of the music that we see here, like when it goes sharp.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's like what Alfred Hitchcock would do with his music and birds being like actual birds and stuff.
Yeah, this is actual people dying.
Not sure if they were dying, but they might have been. I don't know what he sampled.
Okay. It was really authentic. We sampled people dying. Now that you say that, that's exactly what it sounds like.
Yeah, it's really cool when you figure it out. And that's really clever of Black Widow to do that.
Do you guys agree? We were talking earlier about how this movie is not as much about Captain America's relationship with Bucky as you might have expected going in. Do you guys agree with the criticism a lot of people have thrown at this, that it really shouldn't have been called Winter Soldier because you would expect the title character to be in more of the film and be more of the antagonist?
Well, yes and no. It's kind of a cheap trick to make the name something that we know going in is a comic book character.
That's it, yeah.
But the film on its own terms, the title, and the Russos even admit this, the title has nothing to do with Bucky except for the fact that Bucky becomes the Winter Soldier. The title's all about that summer soldier theme that Dan was talking about, and the Vietnam soldiers that came back that were called the Winter Soldiers. It's entirely that.
Yeah, exactly. I think thematically, in the context of this movie, Captain America is the Winter Soldier.
Exactly. It's more for him than it is for Bucky in the at the end of the day. It's just going in to the theater. It's kind of annoying.
And he's there to represent something.
Yeah. By the way, if his shield absorbs vibrations, there's no way it should be able to deflect bullets, the way it just did.
That's a good point.
And they
never thought about that.
Bad vibrations.
Way before. I feel like I'm talking too much. So Dan, do you want to jump in on stuff that we've mentioned?
No, it's okay. I've just been enjoying listening because you guys have been very insightful so far.
We're just here to listen to you, Steve. You know everything about this movie. It's the only thing you've watched since it came out. We've had episodes of Primetime Crisis Live where Steve's like, "I'm sorry, I didn't watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. this week. I was too busy watching Winter Soldier for the 503rd time."
Before Cap said we were doing this tonight, I actually did just watch it this morning.
Yeah, he didn't know we were going to do this. We did this on a whim at the last minute, and Steve was like, well, luckily I'm prepared. I watched it this morning. I'm like, Steve, you were prepared yesterday, buddy.
I was prepared when it came out in theaters, and I saw it 8 times.
8 times.
3 times the same weekend.
I really like Black Widow's ruse here.
Oh, yeah, it's great.
Anyway, Dan, you should say some things, because Steve's right. He has been talking too much.
I have been.
I do like that we get an action scene here where Captain America and Black Widow are completely out of their element. Like, so they were surprise attacked. They're in their civilian clothes. It's kind of cool. I mean, Captain America doesn't need a suit to, like, you know, be good at fighting stuff. But I think that's at least kind of cool. And it's not like the, you know, stupid typical superhero movie thing where he takes his mask off because we need to get the actor some FaceTime on the screen and so we can earn his paycheck. And it's not just a stunt double all the time. It actually makes sense for the story. I think that's cool.
Yeah, and the fact that the tails have been turned for them now that they're fighting against S.H.I.E.L.D. as opposed to fighting like S.H.I.E.L.D. with them.
Right, exactly.
So that music cue right there when Winter Soldier first showed up and then punched the shield, that's one of my favorite bits. Particularly when the shield hits the metal and it's off the page. Here's just another small criticism. So if Bucky's a super soldier, then the Incredible Hulk makes no sense because clearly Hydra has a super soldier serum and they haven't been using it. And if Bucky isn't a super soldier, he's way too strong.
Wait, why does that make Hulk not make any sense?
Because Hulk, the Abomination and Banner become what they are because there's no super soldier serum. And they were trying to copy it.
Well, yeah, but how does Hydra having it
But then why don't they
change
ever use
anything?
it? Why don't they ever use it? Ever? Why didn't they
use
it when they...
with this. I don't know what you're saying. I mean, nobody knows Hydra exists, so
why,
what's your point?
Why would they need to go into hiding if they can just inject everyone in their team with super soldier serums and take over S.H.I.E.L.D.? Why don't they use it with everyone else in their operation? Why don't they inject all the other soldiers with it?
Because maybe, Steve, they've read all the scripts and they know what needs to happen in the movies. Yeah, no, you're making a good point. Well, yeah, I can't think of any good. I was going to say maybe it has something to do with Winter Soldier being hard to control or something, but he doesn't seem to be until he meets Steve. Kind of.
And then the other thing is that the writers for the film talk about the fact that the reason Bucky survived the fall with only losing his arms because of a super soldier variant. Like, so wait, what happened to that? Where did the drug go?
A super soldier variant. So like
he had a serum
so like
he
drops. Right. Okay.
And that still further makes no sense because then how come he didn't have super soldier tendencies when he was fighting with Cap after he was liberated?
So you just got to give me a minute to process all this. Clearly, you've thought about it quite a bit.
I mean, I've got very minor quibbles with that movie, so I tend to think them to death because I don't want to not like the movie.
Sounds counterproductive, Steve. No, it's good. You got to be objective enough to see the flaws that are there. No, you're absolutely right. That is kind of a problem.
It is minor, but it has the potential to really rebound into something that's a major issue if they don't address it eventually.
Yeah, because it doesn't even matter if it's based on the same formula. Why didn't they make more of them?
Yeah. I mean, you can't ever go back...
Forget Super Soldier. Why didn't they make more?
And all you really need is second season Agent Carter have... what's his name? Have Zemo come in... Not Zemo. Zola. You have Zola come in, say that the drug they gave Bucky was experimental, they activated it later, and they can't make more because it was all lost when the facility blew up when they freed all the captured soldiers.
Well, and I will say that this movie sometimes doesn't do quite a good enough job of making certain details explicit. Ideas, certainly. But, I mean, I had to watch the movie 3 times before I saw the missing arm. So there are some bits like that. Maybe that's what they intended, something like that, Steve, and it just didn't quite make the movie in that nobody talks about it. Because it's not enough just to see the facility explode. How would you know?
Yeah, really. Yeah, it's those minor things, especially with the Winter Soldier backstory. And they didn't film more that got cut out. They just didn't film that much with that kind of stuff. By the way, Agent Maria Hill's dialogue there is ad-libbed because the helmet took forever to get off her head.
That's funny. That's very Star Wars. Yeah, well, you can kind of tell that's an ad lib because that sounds like the kind of thing she would say. That's a very Colby Smulders kind of line. They just pulled that right out of How I Met Your Mother.
Probably.
She forgot what character she was playing for a moment. No. I think that Maria Hill is what if that character was a Shield agent, and I have no problem with that. I think that's great. I mean, if you think about it, anybody that's gonna be Nick Fury's right hand man is gonna be snarky.
Yeah, that would have to be.
Because he's the most sarcastic person on the planet.
Yes.
And he is so tired of these mother effing Hydra agents in this mother effing helicarrier.
I know that when I first saw this, it was actually... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna briefly say I always like to think that Samuel L. Jackson's characters are all the same person, just in like different settings. Like I would imagine that Nick Fury has that wallet from Pulp Fiction.
Well, and then of course to your point, then they reference it on the tombstone.
Yes.
So really, in a galaxy a long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, Mace Windu didn't really die, but got blown into a wormhole and got sucked into the present, where he got to fly a plane with snakes on it, and that didn't really work out for him. So he went back in time a little bit further and lost an eye and became Nick Fury.
Yep. I agree.
After potentially trying a career as a guy named Shaft in a really bad remake.
That doesn't really explain Django, but okay.
Oh, that's true.
What I love about that whole theory, Steve, is that that character has to get into the 20th century before he develops any personality whatsoever. He's like, well, then he watches. Then he gets really annoyed and angry on an airplane with these stupid snakes, and so that's how he develops his kind of sarcastic personality. And then he watches like the real Shaft and some other things, and then he gets all.
So Brubaker.
Oh my God, Zola's so freaking creepy. Anyway, I'm sorry. What?
I'm sorry. I was just saying Brubaker is about to show up in this scene.
See, I didn't even know he had a cameo because I don't know what he looks like.
Guy with glasses, bald hair, and a beard.
Oh, okay.
I got the chance to meet him once before at Heroes Con, and he's a really interesting guy. I also got a chance to meet Steve Epting, who signed a bunch of my Winter Soldier and Captain America posters, which was fun.
Steve Epting is a great artist.
He is. He's one of my favorites. He does that in 2000s.
I love his FF stuff was fantastic.
Yeah.
Hickman and Epting.
They're a dream team.
I've met Steve Epting too at a convention. He's a very humble guy, very soft-spoken, very quiet. Nice guy though.
One of my favorite things about him is that he dresses so plainly that you can't even tell that he's a famous artist. Like, he doesn't wear his badge or anything. He doesn't kind of like sit at his booth. He just kind of walks around and talks to people and acts like a pedestrian, reading comics and buying comics. It's so cool.
That's what's nice about not being too high profile when you're a writer and an artist. There's really no reason anybody has to know what you look like unless you, put yourself on display a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Unless you're like, Stan Lee and you're a marketing mastermind and, crave the spotlight and thrive in it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, exactly. But that only happens if you want it. I mean,
exactly.
You can be a giant, director or the head of a company and nobody ever know who you are. But, obviously you can't be an actor and have that.
That's
your job is to stand in front of a camera.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like Steve Ditko. Like 3 photographs of that guy exist. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, people don't know what he looks like. Well, and also only 1 or 2 recordings because he never did interviews.
Yeah, and he lives as a recluse now. And he created one of the most profitable characters in the history of fiction.
And arguably has one of the best runs, or if not the best run on that character in history.
Yes, that is true.
But Neil Gaiman got to meet him, lucky duck.
Oh, he did, didn't he? Yeah. So the speech Robert Redford just gave to the Winter Soldier, they used that in the trailer, and was I the only one who thought he was talking to Captain America when he gave that speech?
I thought he was as well.
It was really cool that they twisted and it's actually the Winter Soldier that he's talking to.
Especially after all that stuff you were saying earlier about how Captain America himself is sort of the Winter Soldier.
Yeah, that's true. Really cool parallels drawn there.
I wonder what that picture was from, Steve. of Pierce
Oh yeah.
that Fury was holding.
Um,
Like, I wonder if that was like a shot taken out of a movie he was in, or if it was like a promo for some movie or something. But it'd be really cool to. I'm sure that's a thing.
yeah, it certainly could be. And I mean, they homage and reference a lot of movies in the commentary about like where they took certain scenes and shots and stuff from. But they didn't mention that, or if they did, I can't remember. But if it's from something, it's bound to be something like All the President's Men or 3 Days of the Condor.
Oh boy, All the President's Men is such a great movie, but I gotta be in just the right mood because I will fall asleep.
Yeah, a lot of those movies have that. Like 3 Days of the Condor is a really boring movie if you don't go into it knowing the fact that it's a very slow talking movie.
I mean, you know how I said I really appreciated how much time we take in this movie? Good lord, that movie.
Yeah, no doubt. The only deleted scene from this movie that I think was kind of necessary is here after this conversation Fury has with everybody, he gives Black Widow the mask that lets her change face.
Oh.
And if they didn't explain that, so it just feels like, wait, why didn't they use this earlier?
Yeah, where does she get it?
Exactly. So I feel like that's the only thing that they really needed. That whole scene's actually kind of drawn out because it's a talk between Fury and Widow that doesn't really amount to much. But just that moment, that exchange, when they give her the mask, it's sort of important.
Well, and honestly, had they known they were going to not use it, they obviously could have, explained it in a single line of dialogue pretty easily later on.
Yeah, they could have.
Sorry, Dan.
I was gonna say, I was reading an interview with the Russos about that scene specifically, and Scarlett Johansson was actually the one that requested that scene be taken out. She said, "I liked the movie a lot when they first screened it," and she was saying that she felt like the scene slowed the pace down a little too much, and there wasn't enough character or plot stuff done in the scene to warrant it being in the movie. So she asked the Russos if they wouldn't mind taking it out, and they did that at her request.
Well, sounds like she was mostly right about it, but I'm surprised that she didn't. I'm surprised that if she was paying that close of attention to pacing and stuff, that it didn't occur to her. Oh, nobody's gonna know where the mask came from.
Yeah, that's a good point. I wonder if...
Because her instincts were right there, so, I mean, I'm just surprised she didn't think of that.
Yeah, all the dialogue in that deleted scene is completely useless. It's just that mask thing. Maybe if they just cut it a little bit so they get rid of the dialogue and just have the pants thing. Or maybe just, like, do a reshoot later where it's, like, stunt doubles hand people the equipment. Like, it wouldn't have been that complicated to get that thing back in there.
I don't remember where, but I complained at some point that we didn't have enough of an explanation for where Sam's wings come from. But the last time I watched this, I was like, oh, wait, no, that's totally in there.
Yeah, it's the scene when they go to Sam Wilson's house and they're eating breakfast and he kind of gives them a resume with their flight pack.
Yeah, well, he's looking at an old confidential file, if memory serves.
Yeah.
It's like a manila envelope. And okay, so what's the problem with the suit here, Steve?
It's got 3 stripes in the middle, and it's supposed to only have 2.
Oh my God, you're such a nerd! Get out.
And they do this solely.
Here's a man that will never be on an episode of Geeks Not Nerds.
This solely because Hot Toys wanted to make a new figure, and they can't do it exactly the same way, so they add 1 stripe down the middle. That's it.
Oh my God! I mean, it's they could have had more than one of those suits. You don't know.
No, in that entire film, it's always just 2 stripes going down side to side and nothing in the middle.
But they could have made another suit and decided that was the one thing they wanted to change, and they just never put it on.
But if it's a replica from the 1940s, that's not a real replica because it gets that detail wrong.
No, that's not my point. They could have found a second suit that he never wore that they built in case he was going to go on more missions. They could have made like 2 suits, and then the second suit they just decided it looked better to have another stripe. And then they kept it.
So why would they keep it in the museum that he steals it from?
Because they found it, and the other uniform they didn't have because Captain America was wearing it when he dropped the plane. In fact, I'm right about this, and here's why. Because we know that Captain America is wearing the Captain America suit when he drops the plane. So the only way they would have that suit Well, I guess they could have the same suit that he had in Ice. Okay. No. I guess they could. Okay, that's dumb. Never mind. I'm just making up something stupid and just trying to come up with a reason. No, you're right.
Um,
That
when Cap and Black Widow and Falcon break into this control room just a few minutes ago, the actor who plays Abed on Community cameos and opens the door for them, which is a show they executive produced and they directed more than half of every episode from season 1 and season 2.
now that they brought that back to Yahoo, are they still doing that show, or is it somebody else now?
They're still producing it, but I haven't seen them direct or write a single episode yet. It's still really good.
Is it of the same quality? I never watched that show. I don't know anything about
Season
it.
1 and 2 are brilliant. Season 3 is pretty bad. 4 is okay. 5 is okay, but 6 is kind of back to where it was the first couple seasons. But
I love it. I love it when Sam says, "Did you do that off the cuff?"
he's got so many great lines like that. Like when he talks to Fury, he says, "I do what he does, but slower."
Yeah, that's great. Well, that's wonderful because he keeps calling back to their first meeting, to the first time they meet.
Yeah. People criticize the Falcon in this movie for not really kind of establishing his character, and that's kind of weird that Cap would go to someone that he just met this morning for help. But the idea at the end of the day is that Steve doesn't have a connection with anyone in the present. And so when he first meets Sam and they talk about how they can't sleep right in their beds because of what it was like when they were at war, they make a very basic connection that they're both soldiers. And that's sort of enough to get Cap a little bit into the world. And he's more comfortable with that than going out on dates like Black Widow keeps suggesting. And he can't hang out with Black Widow because he doesn't know who she is until halfway through this movie.
I think you're right, but I also think that the scene after he's at the meeting is just as important, if not more so.
Yeah, probably so.
Because now the connection isn't just that they're both soldiers, but that they both are sacrifice themselves and give of themselves for other people. So when he later says, "I do what he does but slower," that's not just a physical thing. They both have very similar outlooks, and it's also important when you get to the end and he says, "I'm a soldier, not a spy."
Yeah, and then even before that, even before they meet again for the events of the film, when he's at the VA and he talks to him, and they both realize they've got
that's what I'm talking about.
They've got a partner that they both lost, which is really cool.
Oh right, yeah, I forgot about that. So I mean, they have many things in common. I think probably the biggest difference between them is I can't imagine Sam having a tough time talking to women.
That's true, yeah. I was gonna mention something and I completely forgot what it was.
Oh, well, we just saw that override thing. Steve's been overrided.
I have
overridden, overrided. English major. Anyway.
So this final action scene is really cool. In the Avengers, there's like the last 40 minutes of that movie is just one big action scene, and it works, and I really like it. But I know certain people, and I can see the criticism that it just goes on a bit too long. That's not the case with this. This feels just right. Like everything with the helicarrier stuff, none of it's gratuitous. It's all really just kind of building to the fact that this was a challenge and that it's a massive scale operation.
I think a lot of it is that we don't feel like we've really been here before. I mean, how many action, especially superhero movies, end with a giant alien invasion that we have to fight off, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot more emotional stuff at stake. I mean, we just learned about Hydra and everything, and I don't know, it's just like a bunch of random aliens that could have just as easily been cyborgs or robots or something that are just kind of faceless, is much less interesting. And of course, I love that movie, but this is much less interesting than Captain America's got to stop these helicarriers that have guns pointed at everyone on the planet.
Yeah.
And can take out anyone they want to at any time. And we've also been told some of who they're going to take out. And then I love it when we get the shots of people they want to take out.
Yeah.
And we've got one pointed at the White House, and I mean, I love all that.
An Avengers Tower and all that stuff. And And also that no one knows who their enemy is really because everyone's in disguise except for the costumed heroes.
Yeah. Oh yeah, good call.
A really quick thing before we continue on with the action scene stuff, but earlier when we talked with when we had the flashback to Bucky, and Sam was telling him that maybe Winter Soldier is the kind of guy you stop. In the comic, everyone was telling Steve to kill Bucky, and he went to Sam for advice, and he's the only guy that reaffirmed to Captain America that no, you don't kill him, you have to save him because that's what you do. So it's weird that they went the exact opposite direction with Sam in this movie, considering how much their personalities line up otherwise.
I really want to know how much of these stunts were done by this lady, but I would imagine very little of it because her face gets blocked a lot.
I think they mentioned it in the commentary. I just do not know off the top of my head.
You know, I haven't watched that commentary.
It's really insightful. It's really interesting. There are so many.
Sometimes I'm glad that I haven't watched a commentary before I do a commentary because I have a tendency to go, so in the commentary, we're making let's not keep referencing a commentary in a commentary.
Oh, that's true. But if anyone hasn't checked it out, there's lots of things in this movie where they just riff on older films, and they mention it scene by scene what movies they're talking about, and it's really cool, especially if you want like a definitive list of 70s movies to watch.
That's awesome. And let me say, because that would have been a lot of the research.
Yeah, exactly.
But let me say how flattered I am if you're listening to this commentary and you've not actually listened to that one.
Do you guys like the Falcon costume?
It's fine. I mean, it doesn't look like a costume so much as, a soldier suit with wings, and that's exactly what it should be in the context of the movie.
I hope that they give him something with a little bit more color in the later movies, which I expect that we'll get. I think it's a fine proto suit,
Yeah, I agree. Anthony Mackie was really, really vocal about wanting the comic book suit in all of its goofiness. But it just didn't work in the context. I don't blame them.
Well, I think importantly, this is barely a superhero movie. I mean, it's a movie that takes place in a world that has superheroes, and Steve is having to, walk that line. S.H.I.E.L.D.'s not really letting him be the superhero.
Yeah.
So, arguably, you don't want to go too far in that direction just in this particular context. It's not a matter of not embracing the comic book roots. We've already done that in this world. We don't have to worry about that anymore. Now it's just a matter of being practical and believable in the context of the story you're telling. That guy was a soldier that had these wing things.
And they do put a lot of thought into this costume, though, where
sure
when he puts his hands out, you can tell that the wings are folding and they flap. And the moment his hands go away from that, guns automatically come out and the wings stiffen. So it works very much as if it's an intuitive design. And depending on the range of motion his hands do, the suit's guns and wings adjust to compensate for that. So there was actually like some actual engineering and forethought going into how someone would utilize a Falcon kind of costume.
I've been really impressed so far that I've actually liked some of the sidekicks in these movies, and that they've gone far enough to actually do sidekicks and not make them lame.
Yeah, we don't get sidekicks anymore, even in comics. Like Batman's barely with Robin nowadays.
Yeah, usually he's just got his Bat family, and they're all kind of questioning if he's not Bat stuff crazy.
And doesn't Robin currently have Superman level powers?
He just burned out of them, so not anymore. But he did for a good 2-3 months, I think.
Oh. So all of 60 pages of comic book. Because when you say a good 2 or 3 months with a TV show, it means something.
Yeah, that's true.
When you say a good 2 or 3 months, unless he's in like a bunch of books, but
no,
he's only in Batman and Robin. That means nothing.
It was so stupid too. He got powers for no reason that people can't explain, and they were temporary for reasons that people can't explain. So the Justice League decides to make a giant obstacle course that he just beats through, and it burns through his powers, and it's over. That's all it amounted to.
That is the funniest thing I've ever heard. So, Winter Soldier. I think it's really funny how many members of the council are either villains from other movies or just like people from like major sci-fi or not like even major sci-fi alum like little bit parts or supporting characters like the Indian guy from Matrix Revolutions is one of
Oh
them.
yeah.
The guy that doesn't understand what karma is.
Yeah.
As superhero enthusiast likes to say, he's one of them. And then the evil corporate guy from Lost is one of them. And like in the theater, I remember pointing and going, I feel like I can kind of tell which ones of these ought to be Hydra just based on evil roles they've played, and it doesn't match up. But it would have been wonderful if it had.
If only. Alex and I, a super enthusiast, did a commentary for Avengers that he's going to put out as soon as Age of Ultron comes out. And he talked about the fact that before this movie, no one was questioning the fact that the world being run by a group of secret shadowy men that give orders to Nick Fury's is not completely terrifying. And then you meet those shadowy men, and the only one that's really terrifying is Robert Redford.
Yeah, it turns out that they're not really all that scary at all. I might have missed something, but there's something that I've never really understood. Has Shield ever been a secret?
Not in this universe, except for Iron Man 1.
Well, they pretend like they kind of are, but then, everybody knows what they are, and they drive around with their logo plastered everywhere.
I think they're supposed to be like the CIA, where they exist and like their cars are labeled and stuff, but like nobody knows anything about what they do. They just operate completely in the dark.
That's true, yeah. That could be it.
And they probably have a lot of secret agents, and they probably have a lot of people that are in disguise a lot and undercover and yeah.
Like I bet in this universe, no one could point to anyone that they know is a Shield agent. They just know Shield exists.
Yeah, I think they operate in a similar way to the CIA does. Like there are times in history we know of where like the CIA was doing things that the president didn't even know about at the time, and they found out later after operations had failed or been successful or whatever the case may be.
Or lying under oath to Congress and stuff like that. And SHIELD definitely operates on that level.
Exactly.
Well, then, could we have in the Marvel Universe a SHIELD-esque version of the FBI and do like a Marvel X-Files show? Could we do that?
That sounds cool.
That sounds monumentally more entertaining than Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
So this
if they...
Sorry,
I was just going to say, if they do S.W.O.R.D., you could have an alien investigative show where they go out around and investigate alien things.
And have David Duchovny star in it. That'd be so awesome.
We don't have to go that on the nose, but...
That'd be great. I was just going to mention this action scene we just saw where the Winter Soldier destroyed the Falcon suit and kicked Steve off the platform. Kind of cements the fact that he's really Terminator-esque and that everything he does really menacing. Like, he just rips off the Falcon's wings and kicks Cap out of frame out of nowhere. It kind of adds to the fact that this guy's a legitimate threat, and the fact that he pulls weapons out of every orifice and you have no idea where he's getting all of them. And that's kind of a point they wanted to make with the movie. That he just constantly has a weapon in his hand.
Well, there's not one person whose mind didn't go to a dirty place when you said that. But, we know they had that... We know how far back they had the technology that created Winter Soldier. Just imagine if they had continued developing it.
Yeah.
Like, they would have had a Winter Soldier who was just the T-1000, right? Like, this guy acts all Terminator, but then we would have had one who was, like, able to make his arms into swords and...
Oh, that would have been so cool.
You shoot bullets at him, and his skin like separates. And he's got holes in him, and then they go back in, and then he never says anything. Actually, okay, this guy is exactly like T-1000 in that regard.
He's got one line in the entire movie.
Yeah, he's got so much screen presence. I think it's great.
Yeah, it's fantastic. This action scene, though, it's certainly one of the coolest as far as acrobatics and Winter Soldier shooting from the sides of the shield to kind of mitigate the shield effects. But it's probably the most emotionally charged one out of everything we've seen in the movie. Like, this is where it really kind of all boils down to Steve capturing his past failure and kind of defining what the world is now versus what he wants it to be and things like that.
After this movie, I don't think that there is any excuse that we haven't had a good, solid, Captain America video game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first
Yeah.
Avenger video game wasn't bad.
Oh, okay. Well, I just heard it was kind of dull because it was like all in the barracks and it was like really gray and it was kind of it was kind of just Arkham Asylum but not as good.
Well, it was Arkham Asylum in that the story wasn't as good, but it's the same location, it's the exact same the exact same kind of controls. So you get to feel like you're Captain America the same way you get to feel like you're Batman. So that's cool. If nothing else, it's really fun to just run around and have like noticeably cool super soldier and shield throwy powers.
I think there's a distinct lack of Marvel video games in general that are great. They need to
Yeah.
get on that.
Disney owns pretty much every other type of company. Do they have like a video game company, or do they just kind of farm it all out?
There's Disney Interactive, but like they do farm stuff out, and they, more recently, did an exclusive deal with EA to farm out all of their Star Wars games. So they could make a deal with some company. I know Marvel used to have a deal with Activision where they published and made
Yeah.
all their games, but that's over now. So
And
we'll
arguably,
have
the
to see
Activision
where they
games weren't
go.
that great anyway.
I mean, there were some of them that were good. Like I liked the first Marvel Ultimate Alliance a lot.
Yeah.
There's always the good Spider-Man games they made, like 2 and Shattered Dimensions and stuff like that. But
I don't know who made X-Men Legacy back in the day, but people love those.
that was Raven, the same people that made Marvel Ultimate Alliance, and that's a studio owned by Activision.
Okay, okay.
And they made the Ultimate Spider-Man game, right? Because I like that one quite a bit.
They did, yes. Raven just makes Call of Duty maps now.
Oh yeah. Ever since that franchise took off, and it's been nothing but the same thing over and over again with different guns.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Um,
Such a
So
tough-
Winter Soldier, I thought I really appreciated that Captain America actually rubs off on Black Widow a little bit.
yeah, that's great.
And it's a character arc I buy, and I think it's subtle, and we don't have to force it and make too big of a deal out of it. But I think that they both develop this mutual respect for each other, and I mean I don't think she rubs off on him as much for all the reasons I was talking about earlier. But at the same time, I think she really makes him think a lot about why the world is the way it is now and why she has to be the way she is.
And there's a really cool parallel between her and Bucky in that they're both kind of components of that philosophical persistence question of how much what really makes you the person you are, whether it's what you remember your past or you engage in a persistent kind of behavior. Because Bucky doesn't remember who he is, and the Widow is a different person depending on the circumstances. And so they need someone like Captain America or some kind of ideology that bounds them to an identity, or at least tries to make them find or search for an identity. Um, which is really cool stuff to do because the Winter Soldier is such a small character that barely does a lot in this movie. Yet at the same time, he's got so much presence and so much importance and so much thematic drive that the rest of the characters have nothing to do but react and grow because he exists.
Well, of course, just at a basic level, and this is maybe too obvious to mention, but I'll do it anyway. I'll take the fall for the group. That's Captain America rubbing off on me. I think that obviously, the Winter Soldier is supposed to be the anti-Captain America in that he is completely controlled, fights for nothing except for what he's told to fight for, and represents the farthest conclusion of the future that he's terrified of.
Yeah, you're right. When you phrase it like that, it almost makes him a little bit closer to a summer soldier, except for the fact that he's controlled. Because those guys don't really fight for anything either, and it's all about just whatever paradigms in power at the moment.
Yeah, it's all opportunistic.
Yeah, so it's not so much that like he can switch his loyalties like summer soldiers tend to, or they're characterized by, but he is a guy that shifts with the currents of whatever Hydra believes in.
Yeah, he's fanatically dedicated to an ideology.
Yeah.
And I think both of them also, and this might be a stretch, but kind of represent the fact that both of these ideas will always, to a degree, exist and persist and be at odds with each other, no matter which one is winning out at the moment. And I say that because both of these people have lived far longer than they were supposed to.
Yeah.
And so both of those ideas and worldviews are still there and still at war with each other. And the optimism there is that the Winter Soldier side of we're all going to be controlled automatons, and we can't have independent thought, but we give that up in order to be protected. That doesn't have to win out, because the other side will also always be there.
And I mean,
And then maybe it's human condition to fight against it.
in what you just said there's a lot of like Plato and Aristotle that I haven't thought of that kind of comes with this movie, where justice in this universe is the interest of the stronger, and people like Nick Fury and Alexander Pierce believe in like that Thrasymachus notion that justice is nothing but the interest of the stronger. And so it's not just a characterization of how the world is, but it's a normative claim on how the world will always be and how it always ought to be. And then Cap's coming out and saying that, no, that's not how it works. And Aristotle comes in that you have to understand the particular situations and the kind of guiding end to what all of this is supposed to turn out. So at the end of the day, there's no system that wins all of this, but there is a complete recognition that the world is in a state that it should not be in, and so now we need to figure out what to do moving forward and find out what the world ought to be.
Well, and just traditionally in superfiction, yeah, really heightened superfiction.
It sounds like a Grant Morrison book, Superfiction.
In super, you can't have it. It's patented me. Grant Morrison, you can't have it. In superhero fiction, the side that tends to win out is whichever one is most seeing people like people and not a means to an end.
Yeah.
And in this, obviously, that's Captain America. I mean, the message is still the same as it is in First Avenger, and that is put yourself in front of everyone else, and that's the ideal that a lot of these people end up still trying to strive for.
And I think part of why that's also great is that all of his sidekicks in this movie have no powers. So it's all about them living up to his example, whether or not they've got the powers. And it doesn't ultimately matter that even Cap does, because he's still facing circumstances that stretch the limits of what he can do. And at the end of First Avenger, the last shot we see him in the past is a picture of him when he's still skinny. So that idea
that's great.
That idea is always there, and we never lose that. It's so consistent.
Well, and what's really important is that he was the way he is now in not just the way he thinks, but the way he acts. He always proves it before he got the super soldier serum. That's the difference between him and Superman. How easy is it sometimes for Superman to uphold that ideal when he has those powers and always has? On the other hand, Steve, these two films are still the best Superman movies we've had in 20 years.
Oh yeah, totally. There were lots of people that watch these movies and they ask me and say, "Hey, when can Captain America and Superman meet?" I'm like, "Well, they're not the same company, but I see why you would go there."
What some of those people might be really saying is, why can't Superman be more like Captain America?
Yeah, exactly.
Because isn't he supposed to be kind of I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways, Captain America and Superman are kind of the same person.
Yeah.
They're different, but just in a broad, superficial sense, Captain America is certainly the Marvel's Superman.
Yeah. What's interesting though is the whole Captain America's Marvel Superman, at least being characterized as Superman, it didn't really start until the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like before that in the comics, he's not so much Superman as much as he's just it's not like he's opportunistic or anything. He does always represent the ideals to strive towards, but he's a lot more nitty gritty. He's a lot more
Or
soldier.
just gritty in general, right? He's a soldier, and that is
Yeah,
the big difference.
exactly. And this is far more Superman than he usually ever is. And Superman deals with a lot of the same stuff in Superman Earth One, which is why I love those books so much.
Yeah.
It's essentially the same kind of issues where it's not just the powers, it is the person, and we do confirm that with that series. We kind of talked over it, but the whole "I'm with you till the end of the line, you're my friend, you're my mission," that stuff is just fantastic. And now the Winter Soldier walking away in the distance.
Come back, Shane. Come back. I just love the framing of that shot and the buildings burning in the background, and
Yeah, it's beautiful.
and now Captain America has to eat crappy Jello. Oh.
It's also great that he's the one in the hospital bed and Sam's okay.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
And the Trouble Man soundtrack comes back. I think that's really cool.
Paying that off, that's cool. Hospitals are usually the worst, most obvious place to do a scene right after bad things happen, and I'm always impressed when it's done well. When I was in writing school, I had a professor who had three big places and scenes you should never do. You should never have people talking on the phone. We live in a day and age now where that's a lot harder. This was 10 years ago.
Right.
You should never have a scene at a funeral, and you should never have a scene at a hospital.
That's true. It does work here though because they don't draw it out either. It's only there for a couple seconds.
Yeah, and paying off the whole on the left thing. I just love how subtle that is.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic. Here's the crossbones that we know and love, kind of.
We didn't talk about the thing with the senator.
Oh yeah, from Iron Man 2.
From Iron Man 2, and
makes...
it's fun that he finally gets what was coming to him. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, sorry, I was gonna say it makes him a lot cooler and more understandable in Iron Man 2 because now he's not just fighting against Tony because he's a jerk. He's fighting against Tony because he's Hydra.
I think that's so much fun.
Well,
and like it's really interesting when you see what his real agenda is, and then you go back and watch that again, and you hear Tony say privatizing world peace.
Yeah, you're right.
And you're like, oh wait, maybe Tony had a point now that we know more about what's going on.
And then the Hydra weapons that Cap found in Avengers, like all that kind of plays up and builds and works in here, and I don't think they were really setting it up.
Here's that guy we recently saw in an Arrow episode, Steve.
Oh yeah, that is that guy. I almost didn't recognize.
That was the guy he wanted to run for president.
Yeah.
And he played Major Hayes in Enterprise season 3.
And then Deadshot killed him before being killed himself. Or did he? I don't remember exactly.
I think he dies in Enterprise too.
I think the symbolism of Nick Fury's eye has been pretty cool. Like going from Avengers forward and then he's here.
I haven't given that a lot of thought yet.
Where he's like, you need to keep both eyes open, and then kind of the blind eye Fury was turning to Shield's operations, and now he sees clearly, so he loses the eye patch. I think that's all really cool.
Yeah, well, and that eye patch becomes maybe even a symbol for the way he was manipulated by Hydra in the first place, where he's got the one eye that's paying attention, but then the part of him that was able to create Project Insight and give Hydra exactly what they wanted, that's represented by the eye patch.
Yeah, you're right.
And so then when he takes it off, that's maybe him in a way recognizing his fault and his failure.
Which is why it kind of bugs me that he's got the eye patch back in the Age of Ultron trailers. Although we don't know the context of that, but it is kind of weird that he's got it there.
Yeah, I'm with you.
We just saw...
Moving forward, it'll be really interesting to see, and I can't wait for Age of Ultron, because it's going to be really interesting to see what in the world he's been doing all this time, after he leaves. Because he kind of just leaves a bunch of people he cared about high and dry, and, it could be that he did that because, he feels like he's done enough to hurt people, and he doesn't trust himself anymore. But the way this last scene is played, I really don't get that from him. I mean, like he's acknowledging his faults to a point, but he's not like, locking himself in a room and crying about it. And then when we see him in Agents of Shield, toward the end of the first season, where he is keeping an eye on stuff, you get the sense that he's up to something.
Yeah. And I mean, part of it is also is that Cap hasn't made anyone like lock themselves in a room and cry, and he hasn't made anyone adopt who he is. He's just kind of enlightened the world to what's been going on underneath their own noses with their own permission. So now everyone's just kind of left to wander and think about what the state of the world is. And so Nick Fury's kind of got a journey to go on to find more Hydra bases and go up to his old kind of habits, but he's still kind of contemplating and not really working on any sort of organized effort as much as he's just kind of thinking. I love how this is the way that it ends. When do we start?
Yeah, that's pretty great.
We'll get to the post-credit scene, but the Russos didn't know what mid-credit scene they were going to get with Age of Ultron, so they went back and forth constantly as to whether it should be the Bucky thing at the end or if it should have been that scene at the graveyard. And it's really tough to know like which one of those would have been better.
I think they made the wrong call. That's a complaint I have. I just feel like the Bucky thing, that needs to be in the movie. I mean, like when you have, and I don't know if I'm right about this, but I have this thing where I feel like when you've got a story that's told in this medium, and you get to the credits, it's over, and
Yeah.
I mean, like, there's having your first scene, and then having some kind of a teaser, and then having your opening credits. And so you could argue, well, are the credits part of the film or whatever? But I don't know, man. I just feel like when you get to the credits, you're telling the audience that it's over. To have any more after that, that's relevant to the movie, and that you really should have stayed for it. It's different when it's setting up another thing and you could easily skip it, because a lot of the time that's saying, okay, it's not really part of this piece, but it's almost, it's kind of not fair, because it's like, well, there's this other bit that you really need to see. You haven't seen the whole movie, and you haven't gotten the whole and that's what I feel like sometimes when I play video games, and they're very story driven, but I didn't go see everything, so it's like I didn't get the whole story. And I'm all about looking at a thing as a complete piece. So when I get played with and I can't see all of it, that's a problem.
Yeah, I agree with you for the most part. I think you're pretty much right in how that works. And it's important that this isn't really a comic book movie first. It's a political thriller. The movie ends when the credits roll. It should be there if that's part of the plot. At the same time, because the Age of Ultron thing's in the middle, the final credits still makes it so this is the Russos' film. It caps off their own movie as opposed to setting up another, so that it's still kind of a complete piece for them. And we get the message with what Bucky's up to from the post-credit scene when he walks away and saves Steve. It's the same kind of message, but I agree with you. I think it still should have been the final shot of the definitive film as opposed to where it ended up.
Well, importantly, this Age of Ultron business is certainly all set up in the movie, because this is, where is the Hydra stuff going? I guess I'm complaining just more of where things are placed. This isn't the problem. My issue is you've got Bucky walking into that display at the end, and I just feel like you need that.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's just a really well done scene. It's really important. It's perfect for his character, given how limited some of that stuff is. I would have really liked that to be the end of the movie.
I don't know why we couldn't have cut to it.
Yeah, I don't know.
I really don't know why we had to have any credit stuff before that. I just don't get why we couldn't have cut to it.
Yeah. The more we talk about it, the more I agree with you. I think they did make the wrong call ultimately with that. But I guess we'll see where we go in the future if we get more Bucky stuff. I know he's going to be in Civil War. It'd be really cool if, I know we won't get this, but it'd be really cool if we got just a Winter Soldier movie, just Bucky by himself leading his own movie. I think that'd be really fun.
I mean, as long as you threw enough money at it, I can't think of any reason that couldn't be a TV miniseries.
Yeah, that's true too. And he's a TV actor too.
I really wish we'd take more of these minor characters and give them TV miniseries and stop talking like, everything's gotta be a show that keeps getting renewed. Why, if we're looking at if we're doing things with more of a comic book mentality as far as business goes, why aren't we doing that with TV and stuff too? I mean, like, we're not even really doing that with Netflix because all those shows are expected to have multiple seasons. I think.
Well, they are, but they are constructed as if 13-hour miniseries movies. So even if they have multiple reasons, they're still designed that way.
So I'm just saying, give Winter Soldier or Falcon or War Machine or somebody, a Netflix series.
Yeah, it's a good idea.
What do you think, Dan?
I think it's a good idea to give Bucky a Netflix miniseries. Joe Johnston, the guy who directed First Avenger, after that movie came out, said in an interview he wants to do a Winter Soldier movie. So,
did he say that? Cool.
He did say that. So that would be really cool to see.
I think Johnston's the wrong guy for it, but that's still really cool.
Yeah, I don't think his style, from what I've seen from him, would jive all that well. But
although if you had told me that he was going to direct one of the episodes of Agent Carter, I think that would have been great.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Dan, we didn't hear from you a whole lot in the third act there.
Yeah, at some point I got like 3 minutes behind you in what was going on in the movie. So
okay. I wondered what was going on because we just weren't hearing from you.
Yeah, and it was hard to talk about the specific scenes you were talking about because I wasn't with you. But I like the third act a lot. It's great.
It's insightful, Dan. I feel totally differently about the whole movie now.
Dan, I was curious to know what you thought of the pseudo interrogation debrief scene that Widow has there, because it's a lot like Iron Man 2, but it also screams to a lot of like Vietnam stuff in my mind, where the government was being held accountable by itself for stuff with some of the atrocities it committed there.
Yeah, I mean that's the classic question with authority in general. That's why I like the spray paint thing from Watchmen. Who watches the Watchmen? It's such a pertinent question. I mean, that's always the question when you're talking about authority. I think one of the things that you were talking about, Cap, with Tony having a point about privatizing world peace is an interesting point too. Because then you go to Iron Man 3 and then you figure out that privatizing world peace has its own set of problems. And if you privatize peace, then you get perpetual war if it's profitable. And that's exactly what Guy Pearce's character does. He says he'll get a monopoly on war and just have everyone fight and kill each other for his own profit.
Yeah, because this is exactly what you were talking about with just authority in general, and that question of who is giving them oversight, whether it's government or whether it's corporate. You're talking about too few people with too much power.
Yeah, exactly. And I think maybe the crux of Civil War will be similar to this movie in that, at least with Nick Fury, because you were talking a lot about how Nick Fury in this movie is not afraid to attain power because he thinks that he has everyone's best intentions in mind. And I think Tony is a guy that is arrogant enough that he believes that he'll have everyone's best intentions in mind if he gives himself the power to police superheroes. And Captain America, through his experiences, knows that you can't really trust anyone with that kind of power, and that will be the conflict of the movie potentially, and it'll be really interesting.
I love that you said that, because the clip from Avengers Age of Ultron with Tony and Steve is essentially that argument, where Steve says every time someone tries to stop a war before it starts, innocent people die. And Tony's questioning, why can't we have the world's best interest in art?
Yeah, I'm going to be really excited to see how they set up the conflict between the two of them in that movie, because I feel like they've been seeding it. There was seeds of it in Avengers, but I mean, even like contrasting the two of them, I'm sure if you went back and watched their solo movies before they met up, you could contrast the way they think about the world and how these two could potentially conflict with each other. And we talked a lot about that with Agent Carter, and even the way that Peggy and Tony's dad see the world, and some of the differences between the two of them.
Well, that was the thing that I latched onto really hard when I reviewed Captain America, not Winter Soldier. That's this movie. I haven't done that yet. First Avenger. because I thought a lot of the comparing, contrasting stuff was happening there, just with Howard Stark, and then looking back at Iron Man 2 also. So like before they ever were on screen together, we were already working on that.
Which is really cool.
Oh yeah, it's really interesting.
In that final credit scene, I love the blank stare Bucky's got because he doesn't recognize himself. That's really cool.
It's going to be interesting to see how political Civil War gets as a movie.
Yeah, good question.
Because obviously this movie's pretty political. Iron Man 3 is.
Yeah.
But and I think it's good that the Civil War thing is a Captain America movie, so it'll be a little bit more in the vein of this, and people will be down with that. Like, I don't think you could do a political thriller as like the next Avengers movie if you were to do Civil War as an Avengers film, like doing that as Avengers 3 instead of Infinity War.
Yeah.
Like, people go into an Avengers movie expecting a little bit more of a bang-up action movie, I think. Not that Age of Ultron won't have ideas in it, because I think, if you watch the trailers, I think it's sort of apparent at least what sort of ideas Whedon's trying to get at with that movie.
But I really think that that's going to be maybe more of a techno thriller.
I think so
too. Like that's gonna be a classic
science fiction
science fiction film. And of course, Whedon has a lot of experience there. He really understands science fiction. I think as much as this was a political thriller, you're gonna see that go back to some of that classic science fiction that I think has really not been on screen on the big screen, or at least very successfully, since movies like a Moon.
Yeah, and I mean that's really exciting because Ultron as a character in the comics, there's a lot of parallels to things like Frankenstein, which is like one of the early well-regarded science fiction novels and things like that. So
yeah, and that's the earliest thing that dealt with over mechanization, dealing with the with all the technology that was happening at the turn of the century.
Yeah, humans with the capacity to create something like life. What does that mean? Industrial
Revolution.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, everybody, thanks as always for listening. I sure hope you enjoyed our commentary on Captain America: Winter Soldier. Dan, I'm sorry you got behind, man.
Yeah, I'm just seeing the post-credit sequence with Bucky that you guys were talking about earlier.
Oh, geez. Yeah. Well, you watch that and have a good time. We're going to leave, but you enjoy yourself. And anyway, I hope you guys will come back with me again for a commentary soon. I really enjoyed having all three of us here.
Yeah, this was really fun. I'm trying to think of something that would be good for all three of us to get together and do. We'll have to.
Well, we haven't done Incredible Hulk yet, and I know, Dan, you and I wanted to do that, and it might be cool. It might be good to have a third person on that, just because I don't know how much I'm gonna have to say.
Dan, I think you really like that movie, and I really don't. So that could be fun.
Oh, that's a good idea. Then.
I like that movie. I don't want to get into my thoughts on the Hulk movies, and it makes this movie longer than it has to be. But
okay, sorry.
I like the Ang Lee Hulk movie and the 2008 one for very different reasons, and neither of them are perfect.
And we haven't done commentaries on either of those. Also, this isn't superhero, but I can't think of two better guys for a Skyfall commentary.
Yes. Let's do it.
So I think that should happen. Well, everybody, thanks always for listening. We sure appreciate it. Leave your comments. We're looking forward to seeing what you think of Winter Soldier and what you thought of some of our comments. And really glad we finally got to do this. We will see you again very shortly. This was Captain Logan, Dan Torrey.
Thanks for watching, guys.
And Steve Baxi.
Thanks for sitting through, guys. Have fun for the next one.
We'll see you again.